Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Blacklist Mutation Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya shivered from the cold, pulling his thin coat as close to him as possible as he crouched down in an alley, trying to seek shelter from the rain. He was 3 years old, skinny and small even for his age, and had a pair of eyes with pitch black sclera and dark green pupils. His hair was mostly black with what seemed like dark green highlights on the ends but were natural. His hair, normally fluffy and bushy, was currently sopping wet and clinging to his face from the pouring rain. Izuku Midoriya didn't know many things, but he did know he was a monster. After all, that's what his mom called him every day, so she must be right. It wasn't often that Izuku got let outside, but when he did, he noticed that nobody had eyes like he did, and whenever he tried to play with any other kids, most of the time, they started crying, scared by his dark eyes. So she called him a mistake and a monster, shouting at him daily for even the smallest things. Izuku must have done something really bad, because one day she took him to a new town and told him she'd never see him again, pushing him out of the car and driving away. That was 3 days ago, and now Izuku was hiding under a piece of sheet metal in an alley, cold, wet and starving. Izuku didn't blame her though. He was a monster and she was a good woman, as she kept on saying he must have done something bad enough to deserve to be punished like this. He knew he deserved this, but he was still scared. He was in a completely unfamiliar town, surrounded by people he didn't know and with no food, money or anywhere to go. Izuku had barely moved from the area where his mom left him, hoping she would forgive him and come back, only moving into a nearby alley so he wasn't in anybody's way. Maybe if he was good here, someone would tell his mom that and she would come and get him, then he would be able to go home. As the evening turned to night and the rain showed no sign of stopping, Izuku was shivering dangerously, the cold being too much for him and his soaked clothing not helping matters. Unable to hold it anymore, he began sobbing loudly. His mom had shouted at him for crying. She always got angrier when he cried, so he tried not to. He was just so cold. And so scared. Aizawa huffed as he walked through the rain. He knew he should have brought an umbrella tonight. At least his costume was water-resistant. Not that it helped that much though. He just passed an alley on a side street when he heard sobbing and froze. That sounded like a child. Carefully, he walked into the alley, keeping an eye out for the source of the noise. The sobbing stopped as he got closer. It sounded like it was coming from behind a dumpster. He slowly walked around the corner, keeping a careful distance from the dumpster as he did so, and a very small child sat next to it. He was clearly freezing, shivering from the cold with his hair plastered against his face. He was also holding a small piece of sheet metal between them like a shield. He could barely see the boy's dark eyes behind it, but he could clearly see the terror in them. He slowly knelt to the ground, making himself seem as small as possible to not frighten the boy any more than he already was. "Hello there, are you all right?" Aizawa asked quietly. The boy didn't respond, just tried to back up further and held the makeshift shield closer to his body. "What's your name? How old are you?" The boy whimpered, then remained silent for a few seconds before replying. "Stranger," he said quietly. "You're a stranger. I'm not allowed to tell my name to strangers." Aizawa internally cringed. This was going to be harder than he thought. He really wished Namuri or Hizashi were here instead of him. They were much better with kids than him. "Alright, very good, that's smart," Aizawa said a little bit awkwardly. "Alright then, well I'll tell you my name if you like. My name is Shota Aizawa." The boy nodded almost imperceptibly. "Are we still strangers?" Aizawa asked the shivering boy. The boy stayed quiet for a moment longer before slowly shaking his head and relaxing his grip on the metal shield slightly. Aye. I'm Izuku Midoriya," the boy stuttered nervously. Aizawa gave the friendliest smile he could. "Izuku Midoriya? That's a good name," he replied, making the boy smile just the smallest bit for the first time since he'd seen him. "Where are your parents, Midoriya?" Midoriya looked down sadly, tears appearing in his eyes, clear even under the rain. "Don't have a daddy. Mommy left me here, said I deserved it." Aizawa felt his heart skip a beat. His mother had left him here? How old are you, Midoriya? Aizawa asked nervously. Midoriya shook his head. I don't know, he answered sadly. How many birthdays have you had? Aizawa asked, growing more and more worried by the minute. Midoriya tilted his head to the side and looked confused. He had gone back to holding the piece of metal over his head to protect himself from the rain. What's a birthday? Aizawa really didn't know what to do now. He had a very young boy here, cold, wet, alone and probably starving from the looks of him. How long have you been here? Aizawa asked nervously. I don't know how to count, Midoriya responded. Aizawa felt his heart break a little bit. All right, how many nights have gone by since you were left here? Hold up a finger for each night, he suggested. Midoriya wiped some wet hair out of his eyes before thinking for a second and then holding up 3 fingers. Have you had anything to eat that whole time? Aizawa asked, holding back his building anger. Midoriya shook his head as his stomach rumbled loudly to accentuate the point. Aizawa nodded. All right then, there's a diner a bit down the street. Come with me and I'll buy you something to eat. Midoriya froze up, looking very unsure. It's all right, Midoriya, I won't hurt you. The street is nice and bright and there's people around. You'll be safe, Aizawa reassured. Slowly, Midoriya nodded, taking a minute to build up the courage to put down the metal and stand up. Do you want me to carry you there? Aizawa offered. Izuku nodded after a moment's hesitation. Aizawa held his arms out, waiting for Midoriya to come to him, which he slowly did. Aizawa slowly turned him around, picking him up by his armpits and putting him over his shoulders, making sure he was holding on tight. Confident he would not fall, Aizawa left the alley and quickly walked towards the diner. As they reached the door, Aizawa lifted the boy off his shoulders and put him on the ground, holding a hand gently as he pushed the door open. Midoriya was staying quiet now, apparently scared of the few people in the building. Aizawa led him over to a booth and sat him down next to the window, sliding himself in afterwards. Are you all right, Midoriya? Aizawa asked him. Midoriya nodded, still shivering. Aizawa stood up from the booth. Wait here a second, I'll ask the people who work here if they can lend me a towel to dry you off. Midoriya just nodded slowly, not making eye contact. Reluctantly, Aizawa walked towards the counter, to a young-looking waitress standing behind it. Hey there, ready to order? She asked. Aizawa shook his head. Not quite, I was wondering if you had a towel or something I can use to dry this kid off, he explained, gesturing over his shoulder. The waitress looking over his shoulder, seeing the small, shivering boy. Is he not your son? The waitress asked, slightly suspiciously. Aizawa shook his head. No, look, long story short, I just found him in an alley down the street. He's cold, wet and hungry. I said I'd bring him here and get him something to eat. The waitress looked at him for a minute through narrowed eyes before she relaxed. All right, I know you're not lying. I'll go fetch a clean towel from the kitchen. Just wait here a minute, she said before quickly spinning on her heel and walking into the kitchen. Aizawa stood there for a few seconds, tapping his foot impatiently before she came back, holding a clean-looking towel. There you go, she said, handing it over. And whatever you order for him, it's on the house. I can't charge someone for feeding a starving kid. Aizawa gave a rare smile. Thanks, but I'll pay. It's no problem, he replied before turning around and walking back to Midoriya. Hey there, kid, he said softly, holding the towel out to him. Do you mind if I dry you off a bit? Midoriya nodded, getting out of the booth and standing in front of Aizawa. Aizawa then knelt down and spent the next 5 minutes or so trying to make sure he was as dry as possible. Is that better? He asked. Midoriya nodded, a thankful smile appearing on his face. It was at that moment Aizawa realized something. This kid already had his heart in the palm of his hand. Aizawa sighed internally as he ushered Midoriya back to his seat. All right then, they do quite a lot of things. What do you like? Aizawa asked. Midoriya shrugged. It doesn't matter, I'll eat anything, he replied sadly. Aizawa felt his heart break again. Did his mother bother feeding him anything decent? Have you ever had a cheeseburger? Aizawa asked him, receiving a shake of the head in response. All right, I'll order you one of them so you can try it. If you don't like it, I'll get you something else. Midoriya shook his head. It's fine, even if I don't like it, I'll still eat it. Aizawa gently rested a hand on his shoulder, ready to withdraw it at the first sign of him being uncomfortable. He didn't know if he was flattered or worried at the fact he seemed to almost relish the contact. Midoriya, it's alright if you don't like it, you can have something else and I'll have the burger. I want you to have something you'll like. Midoriya nodded as Aizawa stood up and walked towards the counter. Know what he wants? The waitress asked. Aizawa scratched his head. Sort of, he said he'll eat anything. We decided he'll try a cheeseburger for now. The waitress nodded, quickly dashing into the kitchen and commanding the cook to get it done as quickly as possible before dashing back out to the counter before Aizawa walked away. Excuse me, but what are you going to do with him? She asked him. Aizawa stopped. He hadn't really thought much further ahead apart from get this kid dry, warm and fed. I don't know, I hadn't thought of what to do. I guess take him to the police? He said, unsure. The waitress nodded. My dad's a detective in the police. I can call him and tell him to come here and bring blankets for the boy, she offered. That would be very helpful actually. Who is your dad? I might know him, Aizawa responded thankfully. Detective Tsukachi, she responded, making Aizawa chuckle slightly. Oh, you're Nao Mesa's daughter? I know him pretty well, I actually saw him a few hours ago, he responded. The girl looked him over again, eyes landing on his scarf. Oh, you're a pro hero, aren't you? I think he mentioned you at some point. Eraser face or something? Eraserhead, he corrected. Wasn't me that came up with it, it was a friend of mine. The waitress nodded. All right then, sorry sir, I'll call him now and bring the food out when it's ready, she said, already pulling a phone out. Aizawa nodded, walking back to the table and sitting down next to Midoriya. The food will be here pretty soon, Aizawa reassured him. Midoriya nodded, looking up at him with wonder in his eyes. You're a hero? He gasped, looking genuinely excited for the first time since he had found him. Aizawa couldn't help but smile at that and nodded. Yeah, my name's Eraserhead, I'm an underground hero, that means not many people know who I am, so now you're part of a super special secret club, he replied jokingly, holding a finger to his lips as he did so. Midoriya nodded eagerly, pretending to zip his lips up. It was just then that the burger arrived, the waitress placing it in front of Midoriya. Carefully, having just gotten off the phone. All right, there you go sweetie, I think you'll like it, she said to him cheerfully. As Midoriya was smelling the scent of the burger, she leant in to near Aizawa. I called my dad, he was nearby, he'll be here in about 5 minutes and he'll bring a blanket in with him. Thanks for the help, Aizawa said, giving another small smile. The waitress returned the smile before returning behind the counter. Aizawa looked at the boy next to him, who was just staring at the burger like he didn't know where to begin. Do you want me to cut it into smaller pieces for you? Aizawa offered. Midoriya nodded, moving away from the plate so he could reach it easier. Aizawa pulled the plate towards him, cutting the burger into quarters, much easier to handle for him before pushing it back in front of him. All right, go ahead, it's yours, Aizawa said. Izuku nodded, reaching out and picking up one of the pieces with both hands, bringing it to his mouth and biting down on it, his face lighting up at the taste. Is it good? Aizawa asked, pleased with the look on his face. Midoriya hummed happily while nodding as he carried on eating, a look of bliss on his face. As Aizawa watched this, he wondered again exactly how badly his mother treated him if he was this impressed by a random diner's burger. Midoriya was halfway through his second piece when a trench coat-wearing man holding a blanket underneath it walked through the door, waving to the waitress as he did, who pointed him over to Aizawa and Midoriya. The detective walked over, freezing upon seeing who was sat there. Eraserhead? I wasn't expecting to see you here. Aizawa shrugged. I was the one that found him. I brought him here. Lucky your daughter works here, eh? Tsukachi nodded, turning his attention to the young boy sat next to him, who had stopped eating and looked at him nervously. Also noticing his discomfort, Aizawa gently rubbed Midoriya's back. It's all right, Midoriya. This is a friend of mine. His name is Tsukachi. He's a detective in the police. Midoriya nodded but still shrunk away. Is he going to arrest me? Izuku asked nervously. Aizawa shook his head. No, of course not. You haven't done anything wrong. Midoriya shook his head frantically. No, Mommy says I'm bad. She says I'm a monster and that if I ever do anything bad then the police will lock me up with all the other monsters. He ummed, clutching his head in his hands, hiding his face as best he could. Once again, Aizawa felt his heart shatter, as did the detective. No, you haven't done anything wrong and you're not a monster. Your mommy was wrong, I can tell, Tsukachi said reassuringly. Midoriya looked up at him, tears in his eyes. How? Because of my quirk, I can tell when people are lying or telling the truth. I call it lie detector so I can tell that your mommy was wrong, he replied softly. It took Midoriya a minute to calm down, but once he was staring at the detective with wonder in his eyes, just like he had done to Aizawa not 10 minutes before. That's so cool, you must catch so many bad guys, Midoriya exclaimed excitedly. Tsukachi chuckled and nodded. I do my best, can I sit down? He asked, looking at Midoriya as he did. After a moment's hesitation, Midoriya nodded and Tsukachi sat himself down on the opposite side of the booth, pulling the blanket he was holding out. Here you go, kid, this'll help you stay warm, he said, holding it out towards Midoriya. Midoriya smiled happily and hesitantly reached a hand out to grab it, but his arms were too short. Aizawa reached over and took it from the detective instead, carefully wrapping it around Midoriya's shoulders, making sure he could still move his arms so he could eat. You can carry on eating, Midoriya. I just need to talk to the detective a minute. I promise you're not in trouble, Aizawa reassured him. Midoriya nodded, snuggling into the blanket and reaching out to pick up his half-eaten burger piece again. Aizawa gestured towards a further booth, standing up with Tsukachi following him. They both went and sat down at a booth a little bit further down. All right then, what's going on? Tsukachi asked. I was on my way home when I heard crying coming from an alley. I investigated and found him hiding behind a dumpster. He was soaking wet and shivering, Aizawa explained. Tsukachi nodded, taking out a notepad and pen. All right, what details can you give me? Aizawa cringed. Not many, to be honest. His name is Izuku Midoriya. That's the only thing I know for certain. From what I found out, I think he was abandoned by his mother maybe 3 days ago. The kid says that she said he deserved it and you heard him. He said that she said he was a monster. Tsukachi nodded grimly. Yeah, sounds like a classic abusive household. Anything about a father? Aizawa shook his head. He said he didn't have a daddy. Don't know much more than that, but I'm worried about how he was treated. He seemed to crave a gentle touch and he seemed way more excited than you'd think about a diner burger. Tsukachi looked uncomfortable. I never like these cases. Sometimes I'd rather deal with murderers and villains. It seems easier than seeing what humans are truly capable of, even to their own children. Aizawa nodded in agreement. I know what you mean. Sometimes I think my job's a lot simpler than yours. The heroes aren't the ones who deal with these kinds of things. You guys really do see the worst of humanity sometimes while heroes get all the glory. Tsukachi nodded. Well, you don't join the police for glory, you join to protect people, kind of like you. You're a pro but you're an underground hero. You don't seek fame or fortune but you're still a hero. You still save people. Aizawa smiled. Thanks, I don't know what I'm going to do about the kid, he admitted, his head dropping into his hands. Tsukachi thought for a second before snapping his fingers. I've got an idea, he told the hero. There's a bit of an obscure law, something most heroes probably don't know about since it basically never comes up, but it grants heroes the right to take guardianship of children if they believe their parents are unfit, he explained. Aizawa's eyes widened. Given what she did, there is absolutely no way his mother could argue against the decision for you to take him away from her. You could become his guardian and maybe even adopt him one day. Tsukachi went on. Aizawa ran a hand through his own wet hair. I mean, it's a big change and I don't know if I'm the best person to do it, he admitted. You care about the kid a lot, don't you? Tsukachi asked. Aizawa nodded. Yeah, I do, but my schedule isn't exactly suited for looking after a kid. You've got friends, don't you? People who would be willing to help out. Aizawa thought for a second. He was right, Hisashi and Namuri would drop whatever they were doing in an instant to help him for most things, let alone something as important as this. Yeah, but what if he doesn't want me to? Aizawa asked, feeling a bit upset at the idea. Well, why not ask him? If he's alright with the idea, you could look after him for now and see how it goes. If it goes well, you could go for permanent guardianship or adoption in the future, Tsukachi suggested. Aizawa nodded nervously. Alright, I think I'll do that, he replied, slowly standing up from the booth and walking back to the one where Midoriya was sat, happily enjoying his burger under the careful eye of Tsukachi's daughter. "Hey kid, enjoying the burger?" Aizawa asked, sitting down next to him again. Midoriya nodded. "Yeah, it's yummy," he responded with his mouth full. Aizawa chuckled slightly at the muffled answer. "Midoriya, you don't have anywhere to go after this, do you?" he asked, voice concerned but trying to stay as upbeat as possible. Midoriya shook his head, sniffling slightly. "If you want to, you can stay with me, I can look after you for now," Aizawa offered. Midoriya just stared at him, eyes wide with tears appearing in the corners. Really?" he asked very quietly. Aizawa nodded. "Of course, if you want to, that is." Midoriya quickly clambered over to him, throwing his little arms around his chest as much as he could, tears now streaming down his face. "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa," Midoriya sobbed gratefully. Aizawa awkwardly patted him on the back, not quite sure how to deal with this or how exactly his life changed this much over the course of about 20 minutes. "No problem, kid. You finish your burger and then we can go if you want. You can get nice and comfy in a warm bed in a bit," Aizawa responded, secretly happy. Midoriya nodded, sniffling and wiping his face with his sleeve for a minute before pouncing back on his burger, attacking it with a vengeance. Aizawa suspected he had been eating slowly, fearing once he was done Aizawa would just leave him. Now that he had somewhere to go, he seemed a lot more eager to go. Soon enough, Midoriya had finished his burger and was sighing contently. Aizawa couldn't help but smile at the sight, neither could Tsukachi, who was stood nearby, holding an extra trench coat folded up in his arms. "I can give you a ride home if you want so you don't have to go in the rain," he offered. Midoriya looked up at the detective, excitement clear in his expression. "We get to ride in a police car?" Tsukachi chuckled. "Sure, you can either be my deputy or you can ride in the back." "Deputy!" he cried excitedly, jumping up from the booth and making a superhero pose. "Well, Deputy Midoriya has spoken, looks like you're riding in the back, eraser," Tsukachi chuckled. Aizawa shrugged. "No problem." Tsukachi held the spare coat out to Aizawa. "Keep him covered with that, let's try and keep him dry." Aizawa took it, folding it out and bundling up Midoriya in it, only his face and green-tinted hair emerging from the large garment. "All right, ready to go?" Aizawa asked. Midoriya nodded. "Yeah, let's go, Dad," he responded cheerfully without thinking. Aizawa froze for a second before burying his face in his own scarf. He would not let anyone see the single tear of joy that just appeared. Aizawa took this moment of peace to think about what exactly he had done. After getting dropped off back home by the detective, Aizawa led Midoriya inside and put him in a bath, helping him wash himself and then dry himself afterwards. Since he didn't have anything that Midoriya could wear to sleep in, he just gave him one of his smallest t-shirts and a pair of sweatpants. Both were still far too big for him, but they were comfortable and clean, and Midoriya seemed to think that the fact he was practically buried in them pretty funny and apparently cozy. After a surprisingly long time, Aizawa managed to convince Midoriya to sleep in his bed for tonight while he slept on the sofa. At first, he rejected the offer, not wanting to take Aizawa's bed away from him, only relenting when Aizawa said it would just be for a night or two until he could get a bed for him for the spare room. The young boy was fast asleep almost as soon as he was underneath the covers, his exhaustion from sleeping on the streets apparently having caught up with him. That left Aizawa sat on the sofa of his apartment's living room, the TV on some random show that happened to be the first one on as he turned the TV on. He groaned and let his head sink into his hands. What the f was he doing? He was 22 years old, he graduated UA just 1 year ago. Why did he decide it would be a great idea to get a kid? He had no idea how to look after a kid, he barely knew how to look after himself. He'd have to learn to actually cook something edible and figure out how to wash clothes, his preferred method of doing so currently being not doing it and just hoping that eventually everyone around him would lose their sense of smell. He sighed once again, pulling his phone out and opening the group chat with Hisashi and Nemuri. Hopefully they would know what the hell to do. Shota done with this bullshit. So, a thing may have happened. I've nothing scream. Ooh, this sounds good already. Hit me with the good stuff, Shota. What did you do? Shota done with this bullshit. I may or may not have adopted a child. Shota done with this bullshit. Not legally or anything. I'm nothing scream, Shota. Did you kidnap a child? Hit me with the good stuff. Oh my god, you kidnapped a kid, didn't you? Shota, done with this bullshit. No, I didn't kidnap a kid. Shota, done with this bullshit. Shut up for a second, you pair of idiots, and let me explain. Scream. Hit me with the good stuff. But true. Shota, done with this bullshit. Alright, basically I was going home when I found a crying kid in an alley. He was soaking wet, freezing and starving. I got him some food, got him dry, talked to a detective, and now he's sleeping in my bed and I'm having a slight meltdown because I don't know what you do with small humans. I have a mouth and a scream. You mean children? Hit me with the good stuff. You mean children, right? Shota, done with this bullshit. Username is currently accurate. Shota, done with this bullshit. Not in the mood for this right now. Shota, done with this bullshit. Be useful or be gone. Hit me with the good stuff. Alright, chill, Shota. Give us the details. Who's the kid? Shota, done with this bullshit. His name's Izuku Midoriya. Shota, done with this bullshit. That's basically all I know for sure so far. Shota, done with this bullshit. We don't know how old he is. I'd guess around 3 or 4 but not sure. Shota, done with this bullshit. Also, his mother apparently used to say he was a monster, maybe because he has black eyes. That seems to be the only thing at all odd about him appearance-wise apart from slightly unnatural hair colorings, but they're pretty common these days too. Shota, done with this bullshit. She apparently abandoned him a few days, just left him there with absolutely nothing except the clothes he had on. Scream. Honji. Scream. Poor baby. Hit me with the good stuff. Do we need to beat up a sheet mother? Hit me with the good stuff, because I'm all for that. Shota, done with this bullshit. No, but I'll keep you two in mind if I need to hide a body. Shota, done with this bullshit. Right now I just need to know what to do exactly to keep him alive. Hit me with the good stuff. You mean aside from the obvious? Shota, done with this bullshit. What's the obvious? Scream. Onimuri, looks like we've got our work cut out for us. Hit me with the good stuff. Apparently so. Hit me with the good stuff. Well, first of all, he's going to need new clothes, you'll need to feed him, and I'm assuming you don't want him sleeping in your bed every night, so you'll need to get him one of his own if you're planning on him staying. Shota, done with this bullshit. Well, I at least knew the basics then. Shota, done with this bullshit. I just need to buy a bed, learn to cook, and learn how to do laundry. I'm nothing. Scream. Shota. Scream. Sweetie. I'm nothing. Scream. You fail at adulting. Shota, done with this bullshit. Hizashi. I have nothing. Scream. Yes? Shota, done with this bullshit. Do shut up. Scream. Yes, sir. Hit me with the good stuff. I'm guessing you want our help with this? Shota, done with this bullshit. Yeah, obviously, I've no idea what I'm doing, but you two love kids. You've got to be better at this than me. Scream. Why not let one of us look after him then? Shota, done with this bullshit. You'll have to prize him from my cold, dead hands. I have a mouth and must scream. Okay then, you really like this kid, don't you? Hit me with the good stuff. You're totally in love with the little guy already, aren't you? Shota, done with this bullshit. I've only known him for a day, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in the room and then myself. I'm going to scream. Aw, Shota's in dad mode. Hit me with the good stuff, Dadzawa. I have a mouth and I must scream, Dadzawa. Shota, done with this bullshit. Once again, username is accurate. Shota, done with this bullshit. Come around in the morning if you want to help, I'm done for tonight. Aizawa dropped the phone onto the coffee table, sighing in agitation. He did love his best friends, but damn did they get on his nerves. Still, at least they'd both definitely be on board with helping, especially once they meet the little guy. Speaking of which, he better go check on him before he went to sleep himself. Aizawa crept over to the bedroom door, peering through the crack in the slightly open doorway. The kid was sleeping soundly, practically buried in the clothes far too large for him and Aizawa's preferred thick quilts. He allowed a smile to creep across his face as he saw Midoriya look genuinely peaceful for once and much more like a normal little boy. After the bath, his hair had returned to its apparent normal style of a big fluffy mess. He lost track of how long he actually stood there watching him sleep. While he had been mostly joking earlier, he did care for this kid and he did want to see him happy and healthy. His expression darkened as he recalled the circumstances that led him to find him. If the police didn't track down his mother, he definitely would, and he'd make sure she understood exactly how much she effed up. Aizawa grew genuinely distressed at the thought that someone would abandon a child as young as Midoriya appeared. He was still practically a baby. And he didn't even know what a birthday was. What else had he been deprived of before he found him? Aizawa shook his head. Even if he never found the kid's mother, even if he would be busier than he had ever been before, he would make this kid's life so much better than what it must have been. He would give this kid everything he deserved. Aizawa chuckled as he turned away from the door. Alright, maybe Dadzawa was a slightly accurate nickname, he whispered to himself as he approached the sofa. Making sure his alarm was set for early in the morning, he lay his head down on a spare pillow, closing his eyes and slowly drifting off to sleep. Izuku opened his eyes slowly, rubbing them and squinting at his surrounding, still sleepy. As he woke up slowly, he realized he didn't know where he was. He only knew he wasn't home, but he wasn't in the alley either. Izuku carefully pushed the thick and comfy covers off of himself, finding himself in huge, baggy clothes. His memory still not fully coming back to him, he started to investigate the room, finding a picture of a man with long black hair stood in between another man with a huge blonde mohawk or whatever you could call that and a woman with flowing dark purple hair. He didn't know who the latter two were, but he remembered who the one in the middle was. What was his name? Oh yeah, Shota Aizawa. He took him to a food place last night and gave him a burger. Izuku smiled at the memory. It was really yummy, way better than the food his mommy would give him. He got pretty sleepy after finishing the burger, but he vaguely remembered coming here in a police car. He was pretty sure. Izuku looked around the room again. It was fairly bare and quite dark, no bright colors, mostly black and different shades of gray. Hearing a noise come from behind the door, Izuku froze, thinking it was his mommy for a second before the door creaked open and a head with long black hair poked inside. "Oh, you're awake, good morning kid," Aizawa greeted softly. Izuku yawned before replying, stretching slightly as he did. "Morning, Mr. Aizawa, thank you for letting me sleep here." Aizawa opened the door fully, waving him through, smiling kindly. "That's all right, Midoriya. Come on, I'll make you some breakfast," he offered. Izuku nodded, slowly following him and carefully climbing onto a chair next to the small table in the kitchen. "I've only really got cereal at the minute, is that all right?" Aizawa asked, holding up a box of cereal in his hand, giving it a shake. "Oh, I don't normally have breakfast. My mommy doesn't give me it most of the time," Izuku responded, genuinely slightly confused. "It's fine, I'm used to it." Aizawa shook his head, pouring out a bowl of cereal, adding milk and pushing it in front of him, nearly slamming a spoon down next to it. "Nope, I'm not having that. You'll eat breakfast, lunch and dinner here. I'm not letting you go hungry at all." Izuku felt small tears appear in his eyes. Mr. Aizawa was really nice, even nicer than mommy. He picked up the spoon and took a spoonful of the cereal, smiling happily as he put it in his mouth. Aizawa just watched this, seeing how happy he looked at just being fed breakfast, not even anything special, fancy cereal, and he was acting like it was one of the best things he'd ever had. Aizawa's phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the message shown. "I have a mouth and must scream. Morning Dadzawa, me and Namuri are nearly at your place. We're looking forward to meeting the little guy you seem so smitten with." Aizawa smiled. He knew they'd be here. He took the seat opposite Izuku. "Hey Midoriya, in a little bit 2 of my friends will be here. They're going to take us shopping so we can get you new clothes, a bed and some better food probably," Aizawa told him. Izuku looked a little bit nervous. "They're friends?" Aizawa nodded. "My best friends, they're both heroes as well. Just a warning, they both get excited easily and they're probably going to get really excited when they see you." Izuku's eyes shined as he grinned with excitement. "I get to meet more heroes? Will I know them?" Aizawa shook his head. "I doubt it. We've all only been heroes for about a year each, and we're all underground heroes, so not many people know us." This didn't dampen Izuku's excitement even the smallest bit. "So I'll know who they are like you? I'll be part of their super special secret clubs?" Aizawa laughed softly. "Yeah kid, you can be our #1 fan." Izuku nodded eagerly. "Yeah," he cried, jumping out of the chair and throwing a fist into the air. "Daddy and his friends are the best heroes." Aizawa had never been more thankful to hear a knock at the door, so he had an excuse to turn around and wipe the tear of joy trickling down his cheek away. "All right kid, they're here, I'm just gonna go let them dash, Aizawa began, interrupted by Izuku running as quickly as his little legs could take him towards the door, bouncing in place excitedly near the door. Aizawa chuckled. Apparently the kid was a massive fan of heroes. That's a start of learning about what he likes. Aizawa walked over to the door, unlocking the several chains and latches on the back of the door. He never saw a problem with a healthy dose of paranoia. After all, it's not paranoia if someone's out to get you. Aizawa took a deep breath, bracing himself before opening the door, a glare on his face in preparation. As soon as he saw a hint of blonde hair, he immediately leaned in and harshly whispered, "Don't you dare use your quirk, I don't want you scaring him by being too loud," Aizawa warned. Hizashi held up his hands. "Of course, no problem," he responded, his voice mercifully normal. Aizawa gave a quick glare to Nemuri, making sure she understood the situation too. She also nodded in understanding. Aizawa nodded, allowing his scowl to disappear from his face and allowed the pair in. They walked through the door to see a tiny little boy bouncing up and down happily, looking up at them with wide, shining eyes and grinning widely. They instantly fell in love with this little boy. "Oh my god, he's so cute," Hizashi whispered. Nemuri and Aizawa couldn't help but nod in agreement. "Midoriya, these are my friends, the blonde one is Dash," Aizawa began. "Present Mike." "The voice hero." Izuku squealed excitedly, only calming down a tiny bit. He carried on excitedly mumbling. "Your quirk is so cool and your hair is so tall, it looks really cool." Hizashi made no attempt to hide the single tear that fell down his face, merely taking in a deep breath and calming down before he tried to kidnap this adorable little boy. "And you're Midnight. You make people sleepy, don't you?" Izuku then squealed, turning to Nemuri. "I really like your hair too, it's a really nice color and I think you're really pretty." Nemuri couldn't help but squeal at the ball of cute that was Izuku Midoriya, blushing slightly at the compliments. Aizawa chuckled, bending down and scooping him up into his arms, holding him against his hip. "Well, color me impressed, we're all still technically underground heroes but you knew who they were, you must really like heroes." Izuku nodded happily. "Yeah, heroes are the coolest, I want to be one," he announced proudly. Hizashi stepped forward and gently ruffled his hair. "I'm sure you will be, little guy, we'll make sure of it." Nemuri nodded, also stepping forward slightly. Aizawa looked to the pair. "Well? Where are we going first?" he asked. Hizashi looked at the oversized clothes Izuku was wearing and smirked. "Well, first of all, you're going to let him put his old clothes on and then we're gonna go take him to get some new ones. Once that's done, we'll split up, one of us will go and find bedding for the little guy and the others will go and get some food that isn't instant noodles." Aizawa nodded, heading back towards the bedroom, carrying Izuku. "All right then, I'll help him get changed and then we'll head out." Aizawa helped Izuku out of the comically oversized clothes, helping him back into his old clothes which were now thankfully dry. After that was done, the three adults and their collectively adopted small child headed out shopping. They spent a couple of hours going from shop to shop, making sure Izuku had lots of different outfits and that they were all things he liked. They were slightly alarmed at how emotional he became over this, but they put that to the side for the minute to focus on Izuku. Once that was done and they were all loaded down with shopping bags full of clothes, Nemuri was sent off to get a bed frame, mattress and bedding for Izuku, armed with the knowledge that his favorite colors were black and green and also with Shota's credit card. He was slightly concerned about that. Meanwhile, Hizashi led Shota and his new kid to go food shopping. Being the best cook of the three, he led them around, getting ingredients for fairly simple and easy to prepare meals for Shota to get the hang of first, promising to help teach him. About another hour and a half afterwards, they all met up again at a cafe to get some lunch. While Izuku was happily munching on a cheeseburger, the other three sorted out a few details. By the time the meal was done, they had agreed on several things. Aizawa would take a week or two off from hero work while Izuku settled in. Once he went back to his hero duties, Nemuri and Hizashi would take turns looking after him at his apartment while he worked during the night since they worked during the day. To help him settle, they would also help Izuku decorate his new room. Nemuri would take the lead on that, having an eye for such things and being quite a skilled artist in her spare time. Every day, Hizashi would help Shota make dinner, teaching him how to make simple meals at first that only require a few ingredients. most of them pre-made. They would later go on to more homemade fare, but that was a bit beyond him for now. For now, they headed back to the apartment, awaiting the delivery of the bed frame and mattress. Namuri had apparently spent extra to guarantee same-day delivery, which Aizawa was not overly happy about, but he grudgingly accepted that it had already happened. After an hour or two of the group lounging around in Aizawa's living room, watching cartoons to the immense joy of Izuku, there was a knock at the door. Namuri stayed with Izuku as the two guys went to the door. Together with the delivery guys, they soon got the bed frame and mattress inside the spare room. All that was left was to put the frame together. Unfortunately, none of them were good at following instructions. It had been a constant issue at UA and was one of the reasons why they became underground heroes, so they could work by themselves. Izuku then surprised them by taking the instructions and going off nothing but the pictures, told them what to do as best he could. Within a surprisingly short amount of time, there stood a complete and correctly built bed frame. Hisashi scooped up Izuku in his arms, throwing him into the air slightly in happiness. "Great job, Midoriya, you're a genius," he congratulated him excitedly. Izuku laughed joyously as he was carefully tossed into the air and caught again, the other two watching the scene unable to hold back smiles. Izuku's happiness was contagious. As Hisashi sorted out the bedding and the mattress, the others returned to the living room when there was a knock at the door. Leaving Izuku with Namuri, Aizawa went to answer it. Opening the door, he saw the familiar trench coat-clad Detective Tsukachi. "Ah, Detective, good to see you again," Aizawa greeted, allowing him inside. Tsukachi nodded, stepping inside. "Thanks, Eraser, how's Midoriya doing?" he asked, concerned. Aizawa gestured over to the gleefully giggling boy on the sofa, currently under a tickle attack from Namuri. "He's doing pretty good, I'd say. My friends have helped me out a lot. We've got a bed for him, new clothes and some actual food, plus the other two seem to absolutely love him to bits too, and they've agreed to help look after him whenever they need to." Tsukachi nodded, pleased. "That's good to hear, no offense, Eraser, but I didn't think you'd have been the type to take in a little boy like this." Aizawa chuckled. "None taken, I wouldn't have thought it either. Anyway, were you just here to make sure I haven't messed up, or is there another reason?" Shota asked, correcting himself mid-question. Tsukachi took out a notepad. "Well, I wanted to see how he was doing, but I've also found out as much information as I can about him." Aizawa nodded. "Great, anything you can tell me will be helpful." Tsukachi nodded. "Now, first of all, we've already found his mother and taken her into custody. We've charged her with neglect, non-violent child abuse and child abandonment," he explained. Aizawa sighed with relief. "Good, I was kind of worried she'd end up getting away with what she did. How'd you find her?" "Well, that was the thing. Several of her neighbors turned her in. Apparently she was publicly bragging to them that she had gotten rid of that monster. Fearing the worst, several of them called the local police. I heard about it not long after and went over to take over the case," Tsukachi explained. Aizawa scowled angrily. "I was going to ask who she was, but on second thought I don't think I want to know. I don't trust myself that I wouldn't try to do something stupid." Tsukachi nodded. "Probably a good idea, although to be honest, I wouldn't blame you." He then cleared his throat before continuing. "All right, next of all, invoking the hero's right to remove guardianship was accepted, and he is now officially under your permanent guardianship with the option to officially adopt him if you both want it." Aizawa looked over his shoulder at the little boy currently snuggling into one of his best friend's sides and smiled. It was a genuine, happy smile. Even Namuri and Hisashi didn't see that smile much at all. "So, he's officially my kid now?" Aizawa asked hopefully, turning back to the detective. Tsukachi nodded. "Yep, he's your kid now. He'll still keep his family name until you adopt him, but if he wants to he could still keep it then." Aizawa nodded, his smile still not disappearing. Quickly wiping away the beginning of a happy tear, he looked at the detective thankfully. "Thanks so much, Tsukachi, this means a lot." Tsukachi shook his head. "Not at all, it's my job, and this is one of the few parts of it that make me happy," he said before looking down at his notepad again. "Anyway, this is most of the information I could find out about him." He began to list off information. His birthday was apparently the 15th of July. He was 3 years old. His father had apparently divorced his mother when she was PRGNT and had moved to America. They were unable to locate him, but Tsukachi reassured him that he would have absolutely no claim to take Izuku away from him. He had not yet been taken to see a quirk specialist, so they didn't know what his quirk would be yet, or indeed if he even had one. They were pretty sure he did though. There was no history of Black Scara in his family apparently, at least as far back as they could follow. They went through more information about Izuku, as much as Tsukachi was able to tell Aizawa, and definitely more than enough for Aizawa to be able to even pass as his biological father with the amount he was told. Just as they finished, Izuku himself wandered over, smiling as he recognized the detective. "Mr. Detective!" Izuku exclaimed excitedly. Tsukachi knelt to his level, giving him a wide smile. "Hey there, little guy, how's my favorite deputy doing today?" Izuku nodded excitedly. "Really, really good. I met more heroes, they're dad's friends and they're really, really nice." It did not escape Tsukachi's notice that Aizawa once again teared up at hearing the word dad. Nor did it escape the other two in the apartment, but neither of them could bring themselves to tease him about it. They really couldn't blame him. Tsukachi reached out and tousled Izuku's mop of hair. "Good to hear, Midoriya. I just came to talk to your dad about a few things, but I'll be going now. I'm happy to see you doing well." Izuku pouted sadly. "You're leaving? But I only just saw you." Tsukachi froze. Being caught in the upset gaze of the little boy in front of him was more paralyzing than any villain. "I'm really sorry, Midoriya, but I need to go. I've got more people to help," he explained, putting on a smile. Izuku's mouth formed an O shape before he started nodding. "Oh right, can I help you? I'm your deputy and I'm going to be hero when I'm bigger." Tsukachi chuckled and tousled his hair again. "Maybe next time, deputy, but we'll definitely work together when you become a hero." Izuku beamed happily as Tsukachi stood up once again, nodding at Aizawa before leaving the apartment, shutting the door after him. Almost as soon as he had gone, Hizashi came scuttling up behind Izuku, quickly scooping him up from behind, tickling him as he did so. Izuku giggled uncontrollably for a few seconds until he stopped getting tickled. "All right, your bed's ready. Wanna go see it?" Hizashi asked. Izuku nodded excitedly, Hizashi taking him off towards his new bedroom, Aizawa and Namuri following him. Just before they reached the door, Hizashi put him on the ground. "Cover your eyes, little guy, it's a surprise." Izuku nodded before covering his eyes with both hands. Slowly being led into the room by Hizashi, he then felt a pair of hands holding his wrists and moving his hands out of the way, showing a comfortable-looking bed with mostly black bedding but with a dark green flame pattern on both the quilt and pillows. Izuku began to tear up at the sight, quickly running to Aizawa's legs and wrapping his arms around them. "Thank you, Daddy," he said, his voice shaky with emotion. Before Aizawa could even respond, Izuku dashed towards Hizashi, doing the same to him. "Thanks, Uncle Zashi," he thanked the blonde hero, resulting in a sound that couldn't decide if it was an excited squeal or choking. Finally, he ran towards Namuri, once again, throwing his arms around her legs. "And thank you, Auntie Nemi," he finished, embarrassingly happy. Namuri wiped tears of joy from her face. Together, all three adults scooped Izuku up, ending up in a great big emotional group hug. Izuku had finally found people who loved him. He had found a new home. He had found a real family. About a week after Izuku's arrival at his new home passed. It was a learning experience for both him and Aizawa. Izuku learned what being loved and cared for was like, and Aizawa learned how to cook ramen, katsudon and curries. In Aizawa's opinion, he had the harder week. Anyway, it was the weekend and Hizashi had basically ordered Aizawa to take Izuku out of the house, saying he didn't want his precious little nephew ending up being a near hermit like his new dad. After a fair bit of convincing, and a little bit of quirk-enhanced screaming, Aizawa finally decided to take Izuku to a park near his apartment. It was only when they had arrived when Aizawa realized something. He had no idea what kids did at parks. As far as he knew, kids just sort of did their own thing, went off and played with other kids while the parents watched on from benches nearby. He groaned, bemoaning the fact that neither Hizashi nor Namuri were available to help him not be massively awkward. He could do without Izuku being taken away from him because he's kind of shit at knowing how to dad. Still, at least Izuku seemed happy. He seemed content to just walk around a bit, enjoying the sunlight and the breeze, occasionally lying down on the grass, closing his eyes and smiling contently. Aizawa smiled as he watched this. He couldn't help it, Izuku was just far too cute for his own good. He made doing anything look adorable. As he had learned during the week when Aizawa attempted to teach him how to eat with chopsticks, and he got maybe 10% of the food into his mouth. Even covered in sauce and noodles, as long as he was smiling, he was still too cute. We watched Izuku wander off slightly, towards a slightly more wooded area. Not too heavily wooded, he should still be able to see him but still. "Hey Izuku," he called, "don't go too far away, alright?" Izuku turned around and nodded, waving at him with a smile. Aizawa couldn't help but return both the smile and the wave as he skipped into the wooded area. Oh god, his kid's cuteness was going to be a problem someday. Izuku was slowly making his way into an area covered by trees with a few scattered bushes. He looked around, enjoying how sunbeams shone down between leaves in the canopy above. He cheerfully pushed a low branch out of the way and came across someone else. It was a girl. He wasn't sure how old, but she looked maybe his age. She was facing away from him, looking at something on a leaf on a bush nearby. He froze for a second, fearing he was intruding on something before the girl turned around. As they looked at each other, Izuku got a better look at her. In terms of hairstyle, they were almost identical, both having messy, untamed, fluffy-looking hair. The main difference being that hers was a vibrant, bright red. It was a nice calm-looking red. It made him feel warm just looking at it. Her skin was also a pale shade of red, slightly pink in its appearance but still clearly more light red. But what really drew his attention were the girl's black eyes with golden irises and the pointed dark red horns poking out of her hair. Seeing these eyes, so similar to his own, made him freeze again, memories of his mommy saying he was a monster, all the other kids being scared of him because of his own black eyes. Was she a monster too? "Hiya," the girl greeted, happily yet cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked, stepping a little bit closer. Izuku stuttered for a few seconds. Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya," he responded shyly. The girl nodded, a wide smile on her face. "Hi Midoriya, I'm Mina Ishido. I like your eyes, they're like mine," she introduced, getting a little bit closer and peering into his eyes. Izuku was confused and tilted his head to the side. She liked his eyes? But why wasn't she scared of him? Everyone else was. He looked to the ground, not meeting her eyes anymore and gently kicking a tree root. "Are you a monster?" he asked quietly. He didn't even need to look up to know the girl got upset by that. Within seconds he heard subdued sniffling. He looked back up at her. Her eyes had grown watery and she was wiping her nose with her hand. "But are you scared of me too?" she asked, voice shaky with restrained emotion. Izuku shook his head. "No, but mommy says that I'm a monster and you have eyes like mine. Does that make you a monster too?" he clarified sadly. The girl stopped sniffling, wiping her eyes dry. "Why does your mommy say that?" she asked, still sounding upset. Izuku slowly sat down, cross-legged on the ground. "Because I am, she always said it, and she's really smart and all the other kids were scared of me, so I must be one," he explained, tears growing in his own eyes. Mina shook her head, plopping herself down on the ground in front of him. "I'm not scared of you. I think your eyes look nice. They're like mine. I've never met anyone with ones like me before," she replied, smiling again. "I don't think you're a monster. I look more like one than you. The rest of the kids think so, but my mommy and daddy say I'm not one, so you can't be either." Izuku looked back up at Mina through wet eyes. "Your mommy and daddy say you aren't?" he asked. Mina nodded happily. "They say I look like a pretty ruby. That's a shiny gem," she explained proudly. Izuku giggled, wiping away his own tears. "They sound really nice. They sound more like my daddy or my auntie or uncle," he replied. Mina smiled. "Is your daddy here?" she asked. Izuku stood up, walked around a tree trunk and pointed towards where Aizawa was sat, sticking out like a sore thumb as he still wore his trademark scarf over a more casual jacket, shirt and jeans. "That's him, that's my daddy," he pointed out, waving to him as he said so. Catching sight of him out of the corner of his eye, Aizawa raised an eyebrow at the sight of the red girl behind him but smiled and waved back. Mina tapped him on the shoulder, making him turn around to face her. "Go and get him." "I'll go and get my mommy and daddy and they can meet each other," she instructed, an ecstatic smile on her face. Izuku nodded, quickly turning back around and running towards Aizawa, giggling as he went. "Hey kid, everything alright?" "Who was that girl?" he asked, still smiling at the sight of Izuku's excitement. Izuku just grabbed a hold of one of his hands and started pulling, pointing towards the trees where they were both stood a few seconds ago, Aizawa not budging an inch. As Izuku tried pulling him, Aizawa allowed himself to limply fall from the bench, as if Izuku had pulled him off, making Izuku giggle at watching him flop off it like his bones had turned to jelly. After Izuku had a good laugh for a few seconds, Aizawa got off the ground, brushing himself off and blushing slightly despite his own smile. "Alright then, you want to show me something?" Aizawa asked as Izuku took his hand and began pulling again. Izuku nodded, pointing back towards the trees where the same girl was now stood again, waving them over. "Yeah, I think I made a friend and she wants me to bring you over there to meet her mommy and daddy," he explained excitedly. Aizawa shrugged. "Alright, sure thing," he replied, following him as he ran over there. A few seconds after Aizawa made it, he saw the red girl bringing over who he assumed to be her parents. The man was about 6.5 feet tall with what could only be considered a true dad bod. He looked fairly normal aside from the fact that his hair looked as if it was on fire and even seemed to be producing light, and that despite his body fat, he was clearly a strong man. The woman was much shorter, standing at about 5'2" with pale pink skin and hair. She seemed to have the almost permanently present grin that her daughter did. As the two other adults approached, they looked at Aizawa and gave each other a slightly puzzled glance for a second before both gaining polite smiles and turning back to him. "So then Midoriya, this is my mommy and daddy, and is this yours?" Mina asked, pointing at the two adults behind her. Izuku nodded happily, but hid behind Aizawa's legs slightly, still shy around new people. A trait this girl didn't seem to have. The tall man stepped forward, holding out a hand for a shake. "Nice to meet you, I'm Kaito Ishido," he introduced himself as Aizawa shook his hand. His wife then did the same. "Hey, good to meet you, Kira Ishido's the name," the shorter woman said, still grinning. Aizawa nodded politely. "Good to meet you too, I'm Shota Aizawa." The little girl tilted her head and looked confused. "Aizawa? Why do you have a different name?" she asked. Izuku stepped forward. "He's not my real daddy, but he's like it, he's looking after me," he explained. Mina hummed in understanding. Mina's parents nodded slightly before looking down at Izuku. Kira knelt to his level, grin still on her face. Aizawa began thinking that was her quirk, permanent grin. "So what's your name then, little guy?" she asked softly. "Izuku Midoriya," he replied shyly. "That's a good name, it suits you," she said, her grin widening even more, making Izuku smile proudly. Kaito chuckled, kneeling and putting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And this little troublemaker is Mina Ishido." Mina giggled, taking the opportunity to try and tickle her dad's sides, which were now in reach. Given how quickly Kaito stood up in his wide eyes, Aizawa assumed that he was apparently very ticklish and his daughter had learned to take advantage of that. He smirked under his scarf. He liked this kid already. Kira pointed over her shoulder. On the other side of the wooded area was another path with benches, similar to the one Aizawa was sat on. "We were just sat over there, want to join us?" she offered. Aizawa shrugged. "Sure thing," he replied casually, giving Izuku's hair a tussle as he walked away. The other two sat back down on the bench they were presumably sat on before, Aizawa joining them, the trio watching their kids sit down and talk under the trees. "So, Aizawa," Kaito began, "Midoriya said you're not his real dad but you're looking after him? There a story there?" Aizawa huffed quietly. "There is, yeah," he responded simply, not taking his eyes off the pair of kids. "Well, are you going to tell us?" Kaito asked. Aizawa groaned. "Alright, I'll give you the short version. I found Izuku in an alleyway on my way home. Turns out his mother had abandoned him a few days before and he was freezing cold and starving. I got him some food, got in touch with a detective and had him put under my guardianship," he explained, turning to face the two. They both looked furious. "He was abandoned? Who could do that to such a young boy? He can't even be 4 years old yet," Kira responded angrily. "He's 3, Aizawa confirmed. What was even more worrying is the fact he didn't know how old he was and he'd never even heard of a birthday." The other two grew even more agitated at that, both seething quietly. Hang on a second, why was he put under your guardianship? Kaido asked, it suddenly occurring to him. Aizawa sighed and leaned in closer. Don't go spreading it around, but I'm a pro-hero. As a hero I have the authority to remove children from parents or guardians if they are deemed unfit and to take temporary guardianship of them until a permanent home is found for them, he explained. The only thing is, in this instance, I was given permanent guardianship and I'll be adopting him officially down the line. The Ishidos nodded. I see, I wasn't aware that was something that could be done, Kaido said as he stroked his chin. Aizawa shrugged. Neither was I. The detective I got in touch with informed me about that. Apparently you don't get taught things like that at hero schools. So how long has he been with you? I'd guess a while if he's calling you daddy, Kira asked. Just under a week actually, Aizawa informed them, both of their jaws ending up on the front. He's the most loving kid I've ever met. He's already adopted my best friends as his auntie and uncle, he added, chuckling. The Ishidos chuckled too after pulling their jaws back up. You're quite a young-looking man, Aizawa. How long have you been a hero? Kaido asked after a moment's comfortable silence. I'm only 22 actually. I only graduated UA a year ago, he admitted with a shrug. Really? What made you decide to look after a kid then? Kira asked, shocked once again. Aizawa laughed, smiling as he rubbed his eyes. I don't know, to be honest. I wouldn't have chosen to take in a kid, he just kind of. I don't know, I think he awakened some sort of paternal protection instinct I didn't think I had. Kaido laughed, the noise sounding like a deep rumble. I know what you mean. I didn't really get what being a dad would be like until we had Mina. Now I'd do anything for her. Kira nodded in agreement, a sly smile on her face. And he's not even the one who had to deal with being kicked by an overactive baby for about 6 months while PRGNT, so imagine how I feel, she added teasingly. The trio continued talking for a few more hours, watching their kids sit, chat and play together, Aizawa smiling widely at the sight of Izuku enjoying his time with his new friend. As the sky began to turn orange, Aizawa looked at the time on his phone. Right, we better get going. I need to get started on Izuku's dinner, Aizawa announced, standing up from the bench. The Ishidos nodded, both also standing. They exchanged handshakes once more before Kaito spoke again. Hey, are you two doing anything tomorrow? He asked. Aizawa shook his head. Nope, nothing planned. Why? I was wondering if Midoriya would want to come and meet Mina again. They seem to get along well and Mina doesn't really have any friends. Other kids her age tend to be scared off by how she looks, Kaito said. Aizawa nodded. I think he would. Izuku's not even originally from Yuzurifu and he's only been here for a week and I've not got him into a preschool yet. Plus, from what he's told me, he had the same problem. Apparently kids used to be scared of his eyes, Aizawa explained. Kira nodded, smiling but almost sadly. I'm not surprised they seem like best friends already then. They understand what it's like to be feared and isolated, she said solemnly. Aizawa nodded, a small smile growing on his face. Maybe, but I can already tell those two are going to be lifelong friends. Look at them. I don't think I've ever seen Izuku as happy as he has been today. Kaito smiled, looking over at the pair currently rolling around in the grass before turning to Aizawa. Here, I'll give you my number so you can get in touch with me if you and Izuku want to meet up again, he offered, pulling out his phone. Aizawa nodded, giving his own number to both and getting theirs in return. All right, I'll ask Izuku, but I'm fairly certain he'll want to see Mina as quickly as possible, Aizawa said, pocketing his phone and turning to the pair of kids. Hey Izuku, come on, it's time to go, he called out. Izuku looked sad but came over to Aizawa anyway. Aizawa scooped him up, holding him against his hip. Come on, what's the long face for Izuku? You can see her again tomorrow if you want. Izuku soon brightened up, nodding happily. Aizawa chuckled, turning to the three Ishidos. Well, he has spoken. I guess we're meeting back up again tomorrow? Kaito nodded. Yep, noon work for you guys? He asked. Aizawa nodded in response. Yep, works fine for us. We've got nothing else on. All right then, see you two tomorrow then, Kira said, having scooped Mina up, holding her similarly to how Aizawa was holding Izuku. The two new friends waved at each other, each with happy smiles on their faces as the two groups went their separate ways. Soon enough, they had made it back to the apartment and Aizawa had gotten started on dinner. Izuku was happily doodling with some colored pencils and paper that Namuri had gotten for him. As Aizawa walked over to the table, 2 bowls of katsudon in hand, he looked at the pictures Izuku had drawn. They were still fairly crude, having been drawn by a 3-year-old, but they were actually surprisingly good. He could clearly make out that most of them were of him and Mina, but there was one that seemed to show him sat on a bench with the Ishidos. "Wow, those are good, Izuku," Aizawa congratulated him, placing the smaller bowl down in front of him, chopsticks to the side. Aizawa had quickly learned that Izuku absolutely adored katsudon, far more than anything else he'd seen him try so far, so he was fairly sure it would end up being a staple part of both their diets, being both easy to cook and tasty. Aizawa chuckled. His 3 main food groups these days were coffee, katsudon, and cereal. Despite still struggling with the chopsticks, Izuku did manage to eat most of his meal, growing very sleepy almost immediately afterwards. Once Aizawa was done with his own portion, he took Izuku to his room, helping him get changed into an all-might onesie that Hizashi had got for him. One of them. Almost as soon as Izuku's head touched the pillow, he was out like a light. Aizawa smiled at the sight of Izuku curled up under the covers, already snoring softly. Turning off the bedside lamp, Aizawa crept out of the room, closing the door behind him. He cleaned up the remains of their dinner, washing the bowls before leaving them to dry. Still having a fair few hours before he would go to bed himself, he decided to turn on the TV, kill some time. He switched it on to a news report about a woman who had been arrested for abandoning her 3-year-old son in an alleyway. Aizawa cringed. He'd never liked the media even as a hero student. That was another reason why he became an underground hero, so he didn't have them treading on his toes and judging every move he made. Thankfully, any details about both Izuku's mother or Izuku himself were not given, the reporter only saying that he was now under the care of someone trusted by senior police officers. Aizawa smiled slightly. At least Tsukachi had his back. Just then his phone buzzed several times. He had 2 messages from Hizashi talking about the news report, but he also had one from what he recognized to be Kira's number he was given not long ago. She asked if the news report they had just seen was about Izuku. Aizawa responded with an affirmative. Kira then replying saying that they wouldn't mention it to Mina, that would be something they could talk about down the line. Aizawa agreed. After a few more hours of killing time and messaging Hizashi and Namuri, Aizawa decided to head to bed himself. As he got changed into his sleepwear, he looked over a new picture frame sat on his dresser. Just next to the picture of him, Hizashi and Namuri just after their UA graduation, there was now a new picture of Aizawa holding Izuku in his arms in a hug while Hizashi and Namuri both gave them both hugs from behind, all 4 of them smiling happily. Aizawa smiled as he looked at the picture. He really had no idea what exactly made him decide to take Izuku in, but he wouldn't change it for the world. The next morning, Izuku was absolutely bouncing off the walls, not being able to stay still for even just a few minutes. Aizawa smirked. He was sure Izuku would have been looking forward to seeing Mina again. He didn't think he'd be quite this excited. Aizawa only barely managed to get Izuku to sit still long enough to eat some breakfast and get dressed. The rest of the morning, Izuku was excitedly bouncing around the apartment, constantly going between drawing at the table, watching TV with Aizawa and trying to jump up and see out the window towards the park. At one point he switched between those things 3 times each in the space of about a minute. Of course, Aizawa recorded him zooming around and sent it to Hizashi and Namuri, both losing their minds at the cuteness displayed. Eventually it was approaching noon and Izuku and Aizawa were nearly ready to set out. Izuku was bouncing up and down near the door, his shoes already on, impatiently waiting for Aizawa to finish packing a small picnic-type lunch for them both. Just to tease him slightly, Aizawa purposefully packed each sandwich into the large Tupperware box as slowly as possible, making sure they fit perfectly. Eventually Aizawa relented, slightly worried Izuku would wear a hole in the floor from bouncing in place too much. With their lunch in a backpack and Izuku in his arms, the 2 set off towards the park, heading for the area where he and the Ishidos were sat yesterday. As they reached the park, Izuku was frantically looking in all directions, trying to spot a hint of red amongst the green of the wooded area they were yesterday. Although he didn't see Mina yet, he did see her parents who waved the both of them over. Aizawa placed Izuku down as they reached the bench, taking a seat alongside the Ishidos. "Morning you too, you sleep?" Kaido asked, giving Izuku a warm smile. Izuku nodded quickly, still looking around like a paranoid meerkat. "Good, where's Mina?" he asked. Kira giggled and pointed over towards the trees. "She's over there, by where you two were yesterday," she informed him. Izuku beamed and quickly started running in that direction. He soon reached the trees and started looking around for his new friend. As he looked around, he heard voices. Approaching them, he hid around the side of a tree, peering around the trunk. He saw Mina leaning back against a tree not far away, surrounded by 3 boys the same age as them. "What are you doing here, monster?" "This is our fort," the one in the middle demanded angrily. The other 2 nodding along, smirking as they did so. The one on the left was a quite fat-looking boy with shaved hair. The one on the right was a taller, lanky-looking one with black hair and a toothy-looking smirk. The one in the middle had spiky blonde hair, red eyes and a malicious smirk. What do you mean, Bakugo? There's no fort here?" Mina asked, slightly intimidated. The blonde one, Bakugo apparently, snarled angrily. "Not yet, but there will be. We've claimed it and we say no monsters allowed in our fort," he snapped back, the other 2 still just smirking at his sides. Izuku felt a wave of anger flow through him. He didn't know who these boys were, but they were being mean to his friend. Taking in a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the tree, quickly moving closer to Mina, getting the girl's attention as he approached. "Hi Mina, come on, let's go play somewhere else," he said, holding out a hand to her. Mina smiled and went to go and take his hand when her hand was pushed away by Bakugo, who had seen the newcomer and with his 2 cronies had surrounded him. "Who are you?" Bakugo asked, annoyed, flinching at the sight of his dark eyes, just like Mina's. "Ugh, look at this guys, he's a monster too, she must have spread it," he said bitterly. Izuku could feel tears welling up in his eyes at being called a monster again, but he pushed through and ignored them. "I'm not a monster, neither is Mina, you're just being mean to her, now leave us alone," Izuku demanded, trying to push past him to get to Mina, who was watching with wide eyes. As he tried to get past, Bakugo stuck a leg out, tripping him and pushing him over at the same time, Izuku being sent sprawling to the grassy ground below. Izuku just got back up, ignoring the dirt on his clothes, and walked over to Mina, standing between her and them, holding his arms out to his sides protectively. "I said to leave us alone," Izuku repeated. Bakugo scoffed, gesturing with his head to the side. "Whatever, let's go find a better place for our fort, this place can't be good enough if monsters stay here," he said bitterly, his 2 cronies chortling as they followed him away. Still stood with his arms outstretched, Izuku only relaxed when they had disappeared from sight, turning around to face his friend. She had tears in her dark eyes, threatening to start pouring down her face. She quickly grabbed him and gave him a hug. "Thanks Izuku, you made them go away," she said, her voice muffled by her face resting in his shoulder. Izuku gently wrapped his arms around her too after a moment's hesitation, still being unused to gentle physical contact. "That's okay Mina, it's what a hero would do, right?" Izuku asked, gently pulling away from the hug after a few seconds. Mina sniffed and wiped her eyes dry. "Oh, yeah, why?" she asked, confused. "I want to be a hero when I'm bigger," Izuku announced proudly. Mina's eyes started to shine slightly at hearing that. Even though people think we're monsters?" she asked, concerned. Izuku nodded. "Yeah, I can prove them wrong when I become a hero," he replied before freezing for a second and then excitedly hopping up and down in place as something occurred to him. "Oh, why don't you be a hero with me, then we can both prove we're not monsters," he suggested excitedly. Mina stared at him for a second before she started grinning excitedly and also bouncing in place. "Oh, that sounds so cool, we can beat up bad guys and save people together," she said happily. Izuku nodded. "Yeah, we can be a hero team when we're bigger." Mina nodded excitedly. "Yeah, that sounds like so much fun," she agreed. It took a few minutes for them both to calm down, but even after, the idea had taken root in both their heads, and it wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. Izuku wanted to be a hero and help people like his daddy. Mina wanted to prove she wasn't a monster and help her only friend. Being able to save people was a great bonus. Over the next half an hour or so, the two sat down, talking about what they could call themselves when they became heroes and trying to guess what their quirks might be. They were giggling excitedly almost constantly until they heard Kaido and Aizawa calling for them, telling them to come and get their lunch, making the two spring to their feet and race each other back towards the bench. Mina just barely won the race, smiling proudly at Izuku, who just smiled back at her. Kira and Kaido were surprised at their daughter's sudden proclamation that she wanted to be hero, but Aizawa wasn't in the slightest bit surprised. He knew Izuku wanted to be, and he knew his happiness was infectious. It wasn't too much of a stretch to assume he could have gotten Mina excited about it too. Aizawa stroked his chin. Maybe if this wasn't just a childish wish and they actually stuck with it and truly wanted to become heroes, maybe he could train them when they were older. Still, that could wait for now. They didn't even have their quirks yet. For now they should wait and see what happens. Aizawa took in a deep breath as he followed Tsukachi into the courtroom. It was about 2 weeks after he and Izuku had met the Ishidos. They had helped him get Izuku into the nearby preschool that Mina went to, which Izuku was ecstatic about. What wasn't so great was that Bakugo and his cronies also went there, but Aizawa was none the wiser about that. 2 days earlier, Aizawa got a call from the detective, inviting him to come and watch the trial of Izuku's birth mother. It was during the day, so Izuku would still be at preschool during it, and due to his age, he wasn't being brought in as a witness. Aizawa had told Izuku about what was happening to her. He was upset at first but slowly came around after Aizawa had explained that what she had done to him was unforgivable and she needed to be punished. While he was still upset that his mother would most likely be sent to prison, he accepted the reasoning for it and tried his best to make peace with it. Aizawa was so proud of him. He was a really tough kid, plus he had him, Hisashi, Nemuri and now Mina, who were constantly showering him with love and affection, so he was pretty sure he was going to be fine. Aizawa took his seat next to the detective, waiting for the trial to start. Tsukachi had assured him the trial was more or less a formality. They had so many reliable testimonies and witnesses who watched her proudly announce what she had done that there was practically no possible way she could get out of it. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as he watched a pair of police officers bring in the defendant. She was fairly skinny, with long green hair and a sickening sneer on her face. Once the judge entered, the trial began. Aizawa didn't expect the trial to be long, but as it happened, it was barely 10 minutes. The first thing the judge did was inform her of the charges against her and the reasons for them. They then asked her if the accusations were true, and to the immense frustration of her lawyer, she said they were, still not understanding that she had done anything wrong. The entire room was shocked into silence at her nonchalant answer, as if she saw nothing wrong with what she had done and expected them to agree with her. Aizawa was glad that the entire room was under quirk suppressants because he saw a lot of the jury and audience become noticeably infuriated. There was really nothing her lawyer could do after that. All the judge did was ask her if she claimed guilty or not guilty. She claimed not guilty, saying that what she did shouldn't be against the law and in fact they should be thanking her for showing a monster its place. It was at that point Aizawa joined the group of people in that room that wanted to tear this woman apart limb from limb. The jury deliberated for only about 5 minutes before they came back with their decision. Obviously, she was found guilty on all counts. The judge stood up and cleared his throat. Izuku Midoriya, this court has found you guilty of the crimes of neglect, nonviolent child abuse and child abandonment, he announced. You are hereby sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison with a maximum of 30 years. Aizawa couldn't hold back his grin. He always enjoyed it when the justice system really nailed the ones who deserved it. With that, the trial was adjourned with Izuku being dragged out by the 2 officers, kicking and screaming as she went. Aizawa felt just the slightest pang of sympathy for her. Even hardened criminals in prison tended to hate people who had committed crimes involving children. Once the other inmates of the prison she was sent to found out, she would have a terrible time in there. Aizawa wasn't even 100% sure she'd survive to be released, especially if she was put into a women's-only prison. They tended to react more aggressively to child abusers. Aizawa was also secretly completely fine with that if it came to that. Despite his personal satisfaction with the results of the trial, he still wasn't looking forward to having to tell Izuku. He was waiting outside of the preschool along with the Ishidos, waiting for Izuku and Mina to leave. He had given them as many details of the trial as he could, not that there were many in the first place. They were both also more than happy with the results. Kira in particular seemed very pleased at the harsh punishment given to her and shared Aizawa's opinion that she may not make it out of prison, although they agreed they would not mention that possibility to Izuku at all. Soon enough, Mina and Izuku exited the preschool together. Both being aware of what was happening today, their mood was more subdued than normal. Izuku had told Mina about what had happened the week before with permission from Aizawa. Mina immediately went into comforting him, and she had barely left his side since. Aizawa gave them a small smile as they approached, picking Izuku up with both arms. "Hey Izuku, how was your day?" he asked. "Fine. What happened to her?" Izuku asked, not quite making eye contact. Aizawa swallowed nervously. "All right then. I'll not lie to you, she's been sent to prison for at least 20 years, he admitted. Surprisingly, Izuku didn't get upset, he just nodded somberly. "And you still think she did a bad thing, she deserves being punished like that?" he asked. "I do, and so did the judge and the jury since they decided to send her to prison," Aizawa responded. Izuku sniffled slightly and rubbed his nose with the side of his hand. "I think I want to go home now," he said quietly. Aizawa nodded, saying goodbye to the Ishidos, Mina giving Izuku a wave goodbye from her mom's arms. Knowing he would be upset, Hizashi and Nemuri were already waiting at Aizawa's apartment, having stopped their patrols earlier than normal today, both willing to do whatever it took to cheer up their nephew. They were both as surprised as anyone that Aizawa had taken in a kid, they just rolled with it better than most people. They were not expecting to fall in love with the kid like they both had. It suddenly made sense to both of them as to why Aizawa decided to take him in, he probably couldn't bear not to. When the pair arrived back at the apartment, the three adults tried everything they could to cheer Izuku up. They made his favorite foods, that they had figured out so far. They made jokes and laughed. Hizashi kept on doing ridiculous things to make Izuku laugh, and they ended the evening by all relaxing in a big homemade pillow fort watching old superhero movies. While initially still upset, Izuku slowly went back to his usual level of bouncy happiness throughout the night. By the time he had fallen asleep, he was basically back to normal to the relief of the three adults. Aizawa gently carried him into his room, which was slowly becoming more decorated. There were a few hero knickknacks scattered around the room, but his walls were bare for now. He said he wanted Nemuri to paint something on his wall when he found out how good at art she was. She had agreed, it was just a matter of finding the time to do it. Slowly, weeks passed, and Izuku started feeling completely settled. He was enjoying preschool, although he hadn't made any other new friends there. Bakugo had immediately convinced all the other kids that he was a monster as well. Surprisingly, Izuku wasn't that bothered, he was more than happy just being friends with Mina. She was just so happy to finally have a friend and not be alone anymore. Then, months passed until one morning that Izuku woke up, thinking it was a normal day. He got out of bed and got dressed before leaving his room, rubbing his eyes tiredly as he did. Once he opened his eyes, he was met with his dad, uncle, auntie, and the Ishidos all stood there in the living room. He looked at them all confused. "Hi. Why is everyone here, Dad?" he asked. Aizawa smiled warmly. "That's because it's the 15th of July, Izuku," Aizawa responded. Izuku still looked confused. "It's your birthday today, you're 4 years old now," he added. It took Izuku a few seconds to realize what he said, then he grew excited. "Really? I'm older now?" he asked. Aizawa chuckled, waving him over. "That you are now, I know you haven't had a birthday before, so let me explain what happens," he began as Izuku walked over. Once he was close enough, Aizawa picked him up and placed him on his knee, revealing a stack of presents nearby. "First of all, you're going to open all the presents that we got for you." Izuku just stared at the pile. Then he started sniffling and tears started falling from his eyes. "Those are all for me?" he asked in shock. Aizawa nodded, ruffling his hair slightly and drying his face. "Yeah, they're all for you from all of us." With some hesitance, and with unspoken permission from everyone, Izuku started unwrapping the presents as they were given to him. First of all, came Hizashi's presents. The blonde hero being only slightly less excited than Mina for Izuku's first real birthday. He had gotten him a set of children's books about heroes, a few pairs of different hero-themed pajamas, and a replica pair of his signature sunglasses. By this point, Izuku was still emotional but was now more incredibly happy. Nemuri was next. She gave him a book on art, having seen his drawings around Aizawa's apartment before and being impressed. She also gave him a big soft green rabbit plushie about the size of him, which he immediately started hugging, and it took some incredible effort to peel him away so he could open the rest of his things. Kira and Kaido had gotten him a few hero action figures and a set of All Might comics, which he was immensely pleased with. Once he had opened those, Mina stepped forward, clutching a small wrapped present. It was incredibly crudely wrapped, but it was clear she wanted to do it herself. Izuku nearly started crying again at that, only managing to stave the tears off by hugging the big green bunny and getting hugged by his uncle and auntie at the same time. Once he had calmed down, Mina held her present out to him, a nervous smile on her face. Izuku carefully took it and unwrapped it. It was a small box inside, which he then opened. Inside were 2 bracelets, both with different colored beads. One had black and dark green beads, the other had black and gold beads. "Those are bracelets my parents helped me make," she explained. "They're friendship bracelets, one's for you and one's for me, they're like our eyes." Izuku just gently took them out of the box, looking at them. Wordlessly, he slipped on the black and green one onto his wrist, holding out the other one to Mina, who put it on hers. Izuku held out his hand, holding it next to hers, looking at the 2 bracelets on their wrists and seeing how similar they were. Izuku then pulled her into a tight hug, tears streaming from his face again. Mina quickly and gratefully returned the hug tightly. The pair stayed locked together for a minute or two until Izuku had calmed down. Eventually, he pulled away from her, his eyes still slightly moist. "Thanks, Mina. I love it," he thanked her. Mina nodded proudly, a wide smile on her face. Izuku turned around to show Aizawa, who was sat next to Nemuri and Hisashi. The latter two were both also crying slightly, overwhelmed by the adorable sight in front of them. Aizawa just had a wide and completely genuine smile on his face. There were 3 presents left, 2 fairly small, 1 bigger. Aizawa gave him the smaller 2 first. "Now then, you know I'm an underground hero, that means there's no merch of me," Aizawa explained before Izuku opened the first one. Izuku nodded as he opened it, freezing as he revealed what was inside. "That means you're the only person in the world with an Eraserhead action figure," Aizawa continued, grinning widely as Izuku examined the figure in his hand. It was Aizawa in his hero costume, his goggles on his face, scarf unfurled around him, and his hair standing up in the air. Izuku absolutely loved it. He threw himself at Aizawa, hugging him as tightly as he could. Aizawa returned the hug, chuckling. "All right, kid, save the thanks for after your other presents." Izuku nodded, pulling away and opening the second of the smaller presents. This one was softer and slightly floppy. He opened it to reveal a smaller version of Aizawa's capture weapon, even made out of the same material. Despite what Aizawa just said, he found himself in another incredibly tight hug from Izuku. He just grinned, not surprised in the slightest. After a few more moments of calming down, Izuku turned to the last one. It was a reasonably large cube with small holes near the top. Izuku and Mina had no idea what it was, although everyone else had a suspicion. Izuku took the paper off and opened the top of the cardboard box before he froze, seeing what was inside. "What is it, Izuku?" Mina asked excitedly, barely resisting the urge to peek over his shoulder. Izuku slowly reached into the box, gently pulling out a small, pure black furred kitten. As Izuku held it gently, the kitten mewled, rubbing its head into Izuku's chest slightly and looking up at him, the cat's green and black eyes reminding him of his own. "Kitty!" squealed both Mina and Hisashi at the same time. Izuku was still nearly frozen, holding the small kitten against his chest as it snuggled against his chest. "That's right, Izuku, he's your pet," Aizawa told him, a wide smile on his face. "A kitten?" Izuku asked, staring down at the adorable bundle of darkness in his hands. Aizawa nodded. "That's right, do you like him?" Izuku looked back up to Aizawa, the kitten nestled safely in his arms, eyes once again glistening with tears. "I love him, thanks Dad," Izuku responded. Hisashi and Nemuri were once again reduced to tears by the sight of their tiny, adorable little nephew holding a tiny adorable little kitten against his chest, letting Mina slide it gently, the red girl's eyes wide with excitement. What are you going to call him? Aizawa asked after a few minutes, letting the two kids fuss over the new addition to the family. Izuku held him up in front of his face. Looking at him, the kitten just mewled, not resisting at all. Izuku only thought for a few seconds before he came up with a name. Shadow, he responded. Mina nodded in agreement while the rest of the adults just smiled. Ah, Shadow, the classic name for a black cat, Aizawa said approvingly. The rest of the day passed with Izuku barely leaving Shadow alone and Mina barely leaving his side, constantly wanting to both be around her only friend on his first birthday, but also give Shadow some more pets. Together they all played party games, Izuku and Mina winning almost all of them, and enjoying what was practically a feast, cooked up by Hisashi and Kira. All in all, it was probably the best day of Izuku's life. It was only just over 2 weeks later that there was another birthday. This time, it was Mina's on the 30th of July. That day was practically a mirror of Izuku's birthday, he, Aizawa, Hisashi and Nomuri all waiting for her to wake up with her parents. Just like Izuku's birthday, Mina was swarmed with presents from all assembled. Aizawa gave her a smaller pair of his goggles, Hisashi gave her a little leather jacket, not too dissimilar from his, and Nomuri gave her a little angel costume which perfectly contrasted with her devilish appearance. She loved all of them, giving them all hugs and thanks. It was then that Izuku gave Mina his present for her. Just like the one she gave him, he had wrapped this himself. The two of them were actually both wearing their bracelets at the time. They barely took them off in fact. Mina carefully unwrapped the small present, finding 2 little cards in a little wallet. She took them out to see a picture of herself on one and Izuku's on the other. They were hero licenses that Aizawa had managed to get for them. Not ones that actually let them be heroes obviously, but they were real cards made for him by a friend. See? That's what our hero licenses will look like one day, Izuku said excitedly. Mina grinned, looking down at them both, seeing her own cheeky grin on her card and Izuku's slightly shy smile on his. They even had some of the names that they had come up with in the park all those months ago. Mina's was Redhead, and Izuku's was Green Eyes. They're awesome, thanks Izuku, Mina cried as she grabbed her friend in a big hug to the immense surprise of absolutely nobody. Then came the time for Mina's parents' presents. At first they were all fairly normal, some clothes, pajamas and some toys. Then came a larger box. At this point, both Mina and Izuku knew what the holes in the top meant. Mina carefully but viciously ripped the wrapping from the box and opened the top, then getting nearly knocked over by what jumped out. It was a German Shepherd puppy. Puppy! Squealed both Izuku and Hisashi at the same time. Mina immediately wrapped her arms around the puppy's body, hugging it gently against her, giggling as it licked her face affectionately. Aizawa leaned over to Kira and whispered in her ear. Did I force your hand by giving Izuku a kitten? Kira chuckled quietly. A bit, but look how happy she is, it was worth it. After Mina and Izuku had petted the puppy to within an inch of her life, Mina decided to name her Akira. It was shortly after these days when everyone's thoughts began to turn towards their quirks. Since most quirks manifested shortly after someone's 4th birthday, everyone was waiting with bated breath to see what Izuku's and Mina's quirks would be. Kira and Kaito were pretty sure that Mina's quirk would be one of theirs or a combination of the two. Kira's quirk was apparently that she could produce a weak but adhesive acid from her skin, while Kaito's quirk was that he could set himself on fire. However, he wasn't immune to it, so he never really used it. Meanwhile, nobody had any idea what Izuku's quirk would be since they didn't actually know what Izuku's parents' quirks were. Aizawa knew it was impossible since he wasn't actually his biological father, but he kind of wished that Izuku somehow had an erasure quirk like him. With this in mind, both families went to go and see a quirk specialist. Coincidentally, they went to see the same one on the same day, right after each other. Mina and her parents went in first. They soon came out with Mina practically skipping. The doctor had apparently confirmed that her quirk would most likely be a combination of both her parents, but he wasn't certain as of yet. Then it came to be Izuku's turn. Aizawa led him in, the two sitting on chairs in front of the doctor. Now then, the doctor began. I believe I'm right in saying that you are not his biological father, are you, Mr. Aizawa? Aizawa nodded. That's right, I'm his guardian for now, but I'll be adopting him as soon as I can. The doctor nodded. I thought so. Would you happen to know what his bio-parents' quirks are? Aizawa shook his head. Unfortunately not. We don't know who his father is and his mother is in prison. I see, the doctor said, then smirked and clapped his hands together. Well, this'll be a challenge then. About time I actually earn my paycheck for once. The doctor went through the tests, an x-ray of his foot, blood tests and then a physical exam. The x-ray showed he had the one joint, consistent with most quirked people. Once the tests were complete and the doctor had the results, he was sat back down in front of Aizawa and Izuku. Now then, I believe that the young man's quirk is a dual quirk, he explained. His eyes are a clear mutation and I believe that part of his quirk will affect his sense of sight in some way. However, according to the blood work, the main part of his quirk is an emitter type, although I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that I have no idea what it could be. Izuku just shook his head. That's okay, doctor. That just means it'll be a surprise when I do get it. The doctor chuckled and ruffled his hair. You're a good kid. You planning on being a hero when you're older? Izuku nodded proudly. The doctor chuckled again. Well, I'll be rooting for you when you become one. With that, Aizawa and Izuku began leaving the office, until Aizawa was stopped by the doctor just before he left. Just a warning, I don't know exactly what his quirk is. I can tell you that it is an incredibly powerful one. These numbers are higher than even Endeavor's, the doctor whispered into his ear, gently gripping onto his arm. Aizawa nodded. That's okay. My quirk is actually ideal for dealing with that if it becomes a problem, but thanks for the warning, doctor. With his warning given, the doctor released Aizawa and let him join Izuku, who was excitedly telling the Ishidos what they had learned. Aizawa stroked his chin as he walked. Stronger than Endeavor, eh? This could be interesting. Coincidentally, it was only the day after Izuku and Mina went to see the quirk specialist that they went back to preschool to find out that Bakugo had developed his quirk. Of the class crowded around him as Bakugo made sparks and pops from his hands. He said he had explosive sweat or something in his hands that he could blow up. Neither Izuku or Mina would admit it, but they both thought that was a kind of awesome quirk. Then, as the days went by, they noticed him start to change. He was never the nicest boy already, but he was calm most of the time. After his quirk manifested, he grew short-tempered and irritable. Izuku and Mina learned this quickly. As always, they were the targets of his newfound rage. Luckily, he hadn't yet used his quirk to hurt either of them, although he seemed to get worse as every day went by, so they both knew it was almost an inevitability. At this point, they were both just hoping to get their quirks soon so they would be able to protect each other from Bakugo when he did snap one day. About another week went by until Mina didn't turn up for preschool one day. Obviously Izuku was worried about her, but he just hoped she was fine. Aizawa told him later that evening that her quirk had manifested, and she was taken to the quirk specialist again so they could figure out exactly what her quirk was. Obviously, the next day Izuku was shaking with excitement to find out what his friend's quirk was. He had Aizawa take him to the preschool slightly earlier than normal so he could talk to her about it for longer when she got there. He quickly spotted her once she did arrive, waving to her excitedly. "Hi Mina," he cried excitedly, waving her over. Mina soon spotted him and ran over to him, an excited grin on her face. "I got my quirk," she cried, even more excited than Izuku, for obvious reasons. Izuku nodded happily. "Show me, show me, show me," he chanted. Mina nodded, holding her hands out in front of her and snapped her fingers. Her hands then burst into flames, although she seemed almost completely unbothered by the heat. Izuku could feel the heat from where he was stood. That was definitely real fire, but Mina was barely reacting. "That's so cool. So you got your dad's quirk?" Izuku asked, bouncing up and down in place. Mina nodded. "Sort of, I kind of got both. Watch this," she said, still holding her hands out, the fire having gone out already. Then, a kind of jelly-like substance appeared in her cupped hands. It then burst into flames, but much larger and hotter this time. Izuku's eyes were as wide as dinner plates. "Awesome, what is that stuff?" he asked, grinning madly. Mina willed the fire to stop and it did so. "The doctor said it was like this stuff called napalm, but a bit different. It's basically really easy to set on fire and it burns really hot," she explained, also grinning madly. He said my skin is even more resistant to fire than my dad's and that I can make this napalm stuff out of anywhere on my body. Izuku was practically vibrating with excitement. So what are you calling it? He asked, getting as close as he dared. Mina struck a dramatic pose with her fists on her hips. I'm calling it Infernal Blaze, she announced proudly. Izuku's eyes were shining. Cool, so you're calling it that because you already look a bit like a devil? He asked. Mina nodded while grinning. Yep, may as well go with it. Aizawa knelt down and gave her a smile. That's a good quirk, Mina. Mind if you use it again? I want to see if I can stop it. Mina nodded, first just lighting her hands without the napalm. Aizawa's eyes flashed red and the flames immediately died out. Mina frowned slightly at the feeling. That feels weird, Uncle Aizawa, she said. Sorry about that, but it'll be good to know if I can stop it if an accident ever happens, he explained. Mina nodded, then producing napalm in her hands and lighting it. Once again, when Aizawa used erasure, the fire disappeared immediately and the napalm evaporated. Aizawa nodded, satisfied for now. We'll have to do some more tests later, but that'll do for now. Mina looked up at him, her head tilted to the side. Why do we need to do more tests? You still want to be heroes, don't you? Shouldn't you know as much about your quirks as possible? He responded, smiling. The two kids nodded in agreement, both smiling widely at the realization that their dreams were one step closer. During the day, Mina showed off her quirk to the rest of the class. One or two were impressed, the rest of the class were terrified. Bakugo immediately chimed in, saying with a quirk like that, all she could do was hurt people, so she'd end up being a villain. The entire rest of the class started laughing and agreeing with him. This wasn't uncommon, but it hurt more today. Mina finally had her quirk, one she was going to use to be a hero, and here everyone was saying she would only be a villain with it. As the class laughed and jeered at her, the teachers doing nothing to stop it, Mina sank to her knees, tears in her eyes. That was too much for Izuku to handle. He stormed forward, standing between Mina and the rest of the class. Stop saying that. Mina's going to be a better hero than any of you could ever be, he defended her, not a hint of doubt in his voice. Bakugo and his cronies snorted. Yeah, right, Deku, like she'd be a hero, all she can do is set things on fire, at least even Endeavor can move around with his fire as well as beat up bad guys. Look at her, she's just a monster with a villain's quirk. Izuku snapped. What about yours, huh? What can you do with explosions other than hurt people? You're acting the most like a villain here. Most of the class was taken aback by the usual shy Izuku suddenly shouting in Bakugo's face. The teachers began to glance at one another, growing slightly nervous. Bakugo was furious, his face was set in an expression of pure rage, his eyes wide and partially bloodshot. Oh yedi ku? Well, guess what? She's a villain and you don't even have a quirk. You're useless, so stop getting in my way. I'm gonna be the #1 hero one day. Izuku just stared him down angrily, not budging at all. Even Bakugo was slightly surprised by that. Eventually the teachers tried to calm things down, separating the class and sending Izuku and Mina away for them to calm down, ignoring who actually had the anger problems there. Izuku was just angrily pacing around while Mina sat there quietly. Eventually he calmed down slightly, kneeling and taking Mina's hands in his. Don't be sad, Mina. Bakugo's stupid, you're not a villain and he's not going to be the #1, you will be, I promise you, he said confidently, making the sad girl look up at him. You really think I can be #1? She asked hopefully, eyes still watery. Izuku nodded firmly. Yeah, of course, me and my dad will help make it happen, he replied, eyes locked to hers. But don't you want to be #1? She asked. Izuku shook his head. That doesn't matter to me, I just want to help people. But what I do want to do is make sure you're #1 and I'm #2, then we can make sure Bakugo can never be #1. Mina giggled. Yeah, that sounds good, she agreed. The rest of the day went by as normal, aside from Bakugo consistently giving them both an angry stare out of the corner of his eye. Then days passed, then weeks, then months. Izuku still hadn't manifested his quirk. Everyone else in the class had by that point and he was made fun of on a daily basis for it, most of them calling him quirkless and useless. Everyone close to him was still certain he would get a quirk, although some days, Izuku himself began to doubt it. Then one morning he awoke from a dream in the morning. Since he was thirsty, he went to go and get a glass of water. He had just filled a cup from the sink in the kitchen when Aizawa walked in, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Dad," Izuku greeted cheerfully. Aizawa's eyes snapped open and he literally leapt in the air in fright. "What the? Izuku? Are you in here?" he asked, peering around the room. "Yeah, I'm just over by the sink," Izuku responded. "How did you see me?" Aizawa then asked, peering in the direction of the sink, barely managing to make out Izuku's outline. "What do you mean? You're right there, how could I not see you?" Izuku responded, confused and tilting his head. Aizawa paused for a second. "How many fingers am I holding up?" he asked. Izuku looked at him. "You're holding up 2 on your right hand next to your head. You've got all your fingers up in front of your stomach?" Aizawa let his hands drop to his sides. "Izuku, it's 3:30 in the morning and it's pitch black in here," he informed him. Izuku flinched. "Wait, really? Then how can I?" he began before freezing for a few seconds. "Wait, was this what the doctor meant when he said my eyesight might be changed by my quirk?" Aizawa nodded, having stumbled towards the light switch and flipping it on. "I think so. Can you still see normally now?" he asked once the room was light again. Izuku nodded, then Aizawa flipped the switch. Izuku's vision was nearly unchanged. He could still make out the slightest details on everything around him. He could make out the permanent stubble on Aizawa's face. He just couldn't see any bright colors. All colors were dulled. Aizawa turned the lights back on. "Well then, I guess you can see in the dark. How much detail can you see?" "I can see like normal. Colors just weren't as bright when the lights were off," Izuku told him. Aizawa's eyes widened. "Okay then, I'm jealous. That would be really helpful when I'm fighting villains at night." Izuku giggled. "You don't need any help with that, Dad. You're already great at that." Aizawa blushed slightly and rubbed the back of his head. "Thanks, Izuku. Now, I know you're excited, but you should be heading back to bed." Izuku nodded, quickly drinking his water and walking back to bed, still grinning excitedly. Later that day, Izuku and Mina were meeting up in the park, it being a Saturday and that being a weekly event. As expected, he was ecstatic at the idea of telling Mina part of his quirk had manifested. As he and Aizawa made it to the park, Aizawa went to go join the Ishidos while Izuku went to where he and Mina always met up, at the wooded area where they met. Izuku walked around a tree to find a familiar sight. Mina backed up against a tree while Bakugo and his 2 cronies surrounded her, sparks popping from the blonde's hands. Not even waiting to hear what was going on, Izuku spoke out. "Hey Mina, come on, let's go somewhere else," he said, getting her attention. Mina went to go and join him when Bakugo's 2 minions grabbed her, stopping her from leaving while Bakugo sneered at Izuku. "Oh, here comes the useless hero. What are you gonna do, you quirkless loser?" Bakugo asked, sneering with superiority. "First of all, not quirkless. Second of all, shut up. Third of all, let Mina go," Izuku instructed, his voice firm. Bakugo scoffed and gestured at the other 2 who released her. As Mina went to walk past him, Bakugo reached out and grabbed her by the back of the hair. "So what are you going to do then, Deku?" Bakugo demanded. "How are you gonna help anyone?" Bakugo sneered again before his expression turned to one of pain as the hand holding onto Mina was suddenly burned by her quirk. His hand recoiled from the pain but soon came flying back towards her, delivering an explosion-powered punch to the back of her head, sending her sprawling the ground at Izuku's feet. Izuku quickly leapt between Mina and Bakugo, blocking any attempt from him to attack her again. "Leave her alone," Izuku shouted, his voice sounding unusually deep. Despite this, he was still scared. He had no way of defending himself or Mina if Bakugo attacked again. All he would be able to do is take the hits for her. Bakugo growled like a wild animal before lunging towards him. "Get the hell out of my way, Deku," he shouted, small explosions coming from his hands. Izuku crossed his arms in front of his face, clenched his eyes shut and looked at the front. No impact came, he didn't feel anything. The first thing that Izuku noticed when he opened his eyes and looked at the ground was that despite it being a sunny day, he didn't have a shadow anymore. Then he looked up at Bakugo and his jaw dropped open. Bakugo was being restrained by what looked like solid shadows. It was as if the surrounding shadows had clung to his body and turned solid, effectively freezing him in midair. Bakugo's two cronies just stared, mouths agog. Bakugo grunted and strained, trying to get out of his restraints. "Don't just stand there, you idiots, get him," he commanded. The fatter one, who had a pair of red wings, started flying towards him. The taller one extended his fingers and ran towards him. By instinct, Izuku pulled his left arm back, pulling on shadows behind the winged one, sending them flying towards him, wrapping around his wings, sending him spiraling towards the ground. He moved forward with his other arm, sending the shadows from the tree just behind him forward, the shadows practically tackling the long-fingered one to the ground, the shadows then looking like the claw of some large monster, pinning him to the ground. Izuku just stared at what he had just done. This was his quirk? He could control shadows? Izuku relaxed his body, the solid shadows dissipating and flowing back to their original places like a black mist. Bakugo quickly grabbed his two cronies off the ground and they started running away, shouting things like, "Monster," and "Villain," behind them. Izuku just stared at his hands until he felt a tapping on the back of his leg. Mina was getting up on her hands and knees, looking at where Bakugo and the other two just were, eyes wide open. "Izuku, was that your quirk? Did you finally get one?" she asked, slowly at first, then quickly growing more excited as she leapt to her feet. Izuku held an arm out and held on to her shoulder. "Never mind that, are you hurt?" he asked, worried. Mina rubbed the back of her head. "I'm fine, it's just a bit sore and I've got a headache." Izuku nodded, then looked back down at his hands. "I think that is my quirk. I think I can control shadows." Mina's eyes sparkled. "That is so cool," she squealed, hopping up and down in place, grabbing Izuku's hands as she did so. Soon, Izuku was caught up in the excitement too and was also bouncing up and down like an excited bunny. "I need to show my dad," Izuku realized, running back towards where their parents were, Mina following close behind. Dad, I've got my quirk," Izuku called, waving his arms above his head excitedly as he ran towards the bench they were sat on. As soon as Aizawa heard him, his eyes snapped to him and he grinned widely. He stood up just as Izuku reached him, catching his running tackle of a hug. "That's great, Izuku, what is it?" he asked, grinning excitedly. "I'll show you," Izuku responded, stepping back and gesturing with his hands. Aizawa felt something cold on his back, like some weird creeping sensation. Then he realized he couldn't move his body. He looked down to realize he was surrounded by some solid black substance. What is it?" Aizawa asked. Izuku released the shadows, allowing them to flow back to their place at his feet. Aizawa watched the mist with wide eyes. "Oh, you can control shadows?" Aizawa gasped. Kira and Kaido were also sat with their mouths wide open. Izuku nodded happily. "Yeah, it looks like I can do whatever I want with them," he responded, gesturing more and making a solid ball of shadow appear in his hand, which he started throwing around, passing it to Mina. Aizawa just sat down, rubbing his forehead. He was starting to see what the doctor meant when he said his quirk would be powerful. He can manipulate shadows practically at will, it seemed like, even making solid objects out of them. That seemed ludicrously versatile. He was nearly caught off guard by Izuku gently throwing the ball at him. Aizawa just managed to catch it. It was cold, it felt almost like a cold breeze, but condensed. It was also completely solid but still almost completely weightless. Deciding to test something, he stood up from the bench, walked to the nearest tree and threw the ball as hard as he could against it. The bark shattered like thin ice, the ball of shadow now being embedded an inch or two into the tree. Aizawa's jaw dropped open again. Something that light should not be able to cause that much damage, he was fairly sure that broke one or two laws of physics. Deciding to test the effect of his quirk, he activated it while looking at the ball. Nothing happened. He used it while looking at Izuku and he watched the ball turn to mist out of the corner of his eye. Slowly, Aizawa walked back over to Izuku and Mina and knelt in front of them. "Izuku, Mina," he began. "You both have quirks now. They're both incredible quirks with amazing potential." He paused for a second before continuing. "Do you two still want to be heroes? Really, truly want to be heroes?" he asked them both, looking between them. The pair nodded with no hesitation, a look of determination on both of their faces. Aizawa nodded, smiling proudly. All right then, that settles it. When you two are older, I'll help you train to become heroes. I'll make sure you become the best heroes you can be, he promised them. Izuku and Mina grinned excitedly, both trapping Aizawa in a double hug. Aizawa wrapped an arm around them both, holding them both gently, giving Kira and Kaito a smile when he saw them behind them. So, Mina began, once everyone had calmed down and they were all sat on the grass together. What are you going to call your quirk? Izuku looked down at his hand, clenching it slightly and watching shadows swirl around his fist. I'm not sure, it seems almost more like magic than a quirk, he muttered. Then he recalled an old book he had read once, a book about sorcerers and mages, hiding amongst normal people and fighting a secret war between two sides, one that wanted to dominate mortals, one that wanted to protect them. He remembered a school of magic from the book. An art of death magic. An art of manipulating shadows. Izuku grinned. Mina went with her devilish appearance and named her quirk Infernal Blaze. Why shouldn't he do the same? People called him a monster regardless, so why not go with it? Izuku clenched his fist tighter, the shadows swirling around it and forming a black gauntlet. Izuku looked back up at the others, a wide grin on his face. Necromancy, he announced. While Izuku couldn't be happier that he had his quirk, it was less of a cause for celebration at preschool once Bakugo told the other kids about it. Izuku and Mina went back to the preschool the next Monday and the other kids parted before them wherever they went. That was different. Before most of them would either ignore them or be mean to them, now they seemed scared of the two of them. They had barely even been there for 10 minutes before they were called away by a teacher. They were both brought to an office where Bakugo and his two friends were waiting. Now then, the teacher said, taking a seat at his desk. Midoriya, Ashido, what do you have to say for yourselves about what happened over the weekend? He demanded, staring down at the pair sternly. Izuku and Mina exchanged confused glances before looking back at the teacher. What do you mean, sir? Mina asked. The teacher scowled harder. You know what I mean, young lady. I'm talking about how you two attacked your classmates while at a park over the weekend. What? We didn't attack them, they attacked us, Izuku responded, shocked and insulted. The teacher scoffed. You'll forgive me if I don't believe you when Bakugo's hand was burned and one of you has a fire quirk. Bakugo held up his hand as the teacher said that, still red from the weekend, with a barely hidden sly grin on his face. Izuku pouted angrily. Mina only did that because he grabbed her hair and was hurting her, she panicked. Izuku defended his friend, Mina nodded in agreement. The teacher shook his head, unimpressed. I highly doubt that. Bakugo is our star pupil and will be a fine hero one day. He wouldn't act like that. Well, you're clearly an idiot if you believe that, Izuku muttered, slightly louder than he intended. The teacher slammed his palm onto a desk. Enough, he shouted. I am on good terms with the Bakugos. I have known Katsuki since he was born. He would not do what you said he did, so you are clearly lying. Izuku and Mina flinched at the sudden loud noise. You two used your quirks to attack people. If you were adults, you'd be treated as villains. It's only your age that stopped that from happening, the teacher added, voice stern. Well then Bakugo should be a villain too. He hit me with his quirk, Mina responded, rubbing the spot on the back of her head where he had hit her. Maybe, after you burned him, using his quirk in self-defense is acceptable, the teacher retorted. Izuku smirked. Oh, so you think using your quirks in self-defense is fine? The teacher nodded. Of course, it's a matter of free use of quirks. They should be allowed to be used for such things. Izuku nodded. Well then I think we're done here. We only used our quirks in self-defense, so we're fine then, right? The teacher stood up from his desk, eyes narrowed angrily. Bakugo, you and your friends can go back to the rest of the class. The trio did so, Bakugo shooting a smug, malicious grin at Izuku and Mina as he passed them. The teacher walked around his desk, sitting on the side of it closer to Izuku and Mina. You two are in a lot of trouble. You used your quirks to attack classmates and now you continue to lie about it. I'm going to have to call your parents in about this. Mina shuddered nervously while Izuku just stared the teacher down unflinchingly. Fine, you can call my dad. He's at home since he works nights. He can come in. The teacher scowled at him before walking to his computer and typing something into the keyboard. After a minute he picked up the phone and tapped in a number. He held it to his ear and waited while Mina and Izuku took a seat on the 2 chairs on the other side of the desk, expecting to be waiting for a while. After about 20 seconds Aizawa clearly answered the phone as the teacher started talking. "Hello, is this Mr. Aizawa? This is Yavin Preschool. I'd like for you to come in as soon as possible to discuss your son's behavior." There was the sound of a loud grumble on the other side of the phone. "Yes, I understand you work nights, however this is something that cannot wait," the teacher responded. There was some more grumbling before the phone went silent and the teacher put the phone down. "He said he'll be here in around 15 minutes. You two will wait here until then," the teacher instructed. Izuku and Mina just nodded, neither saying anything as the teacher left the room. Once he had done, Mina looked at Izuku nervously. "Izuku, what if we get in loads of trouble?" she asked nervously. Izuku reached over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry about it. We didn't do anything wrong. My dad will know that, and if we need to prove that, he could call a detective friend of his whose quirk can tell when people are lying," he reassured her. Mina nodded, a bit less worried now. After a short while, the door opened again as the teacher walked back inside, Aizawa following behind. Aizawa was still wearing his jumpsuit, clearly not having bothered to get changed into something else. The teacher took his seat while Aizawa just leaned against the door frame, disinterestedly. "Now then, Mr. Aizawa, are you aware of why you're here?" the teacher asked. Aizawa huffed. "Because you woke me up with a phone call and told me to come here. Next question," he answered in a bad mood. The teacher scowled slightly at the rude response but just carried on. "You're here to address your son's and his friend's behavior," the teacher explained. Aizawa nodded. "All right, go on, let's hear what you've got to say." Izuku smirked at seeing the teacher grow more agitated with each of his dad's responses. "Your son and his friend attacked several of their classmates with their quirks over the weekend at a park," the teacher told him. Aizawa's eyes narrowed at the teacher. "Oh, is that right?" he asked, his tone quickly turning angry. The teacher nodded, misunderstanding the look Aizawa was giving him. "Yes, according to several students, young Ishido here burned one of them and then Izuku attacked the others with shadows, hitting all 3 of them several times." Aizawa was fully glaring at the teacher now. "Izuku, Mina, go and wait outside for a minute," he instructed calmly. They nodded their heads and began to leave the room. "Excuse me, you will not be going anywhere," the teacher interjected. "Shut up," Aizawa simply snapped at the teacher, nodding at the door, saying for the kids to carry on leaving. Once they had left the room, Aizawa walked up to the desk and leaned on it, getting close to the teacher's face. "Exactly how stupid are you?" Aizawa demanded. "I beg your pardon?" the teacher gasped. "No, none of that. You heard me perfectly. I asked exactly how stupid you are. I cannot fathom as to how you would think that either my son or Mina would attack someone unprompted," Aizawa snapped. "Ignoring your impertinent question, there are 3 boys who all claim the same thing, that Mina burned one and Izuku attacked all 3 of them," the teacher responded, quickly growing angry. "Oh really? Tell me, do you have any idea what the rest of your students think about them?" Aizawa demanded. "When you led me through that classroom, I was in there for less than 10 seconds and I overheard 3 separate conversations about how Bakugo had told the teachers that they had attacked him and now they were getting in trouble," he added. The teacher had nothing to say, just continuing to glare at Aizawa. "The rest of the kids both hate and fear them. I could tell that with barely any exposure to them. You are a teacher who works with them on a daily basis. You therefore are either incompetent or complicit," Aizawa finished. The teacher scoffed angrily. "Do you not think there may be a reason that the rest of the class are scared of them? Maybe because they use their quirks to attack people," the teacher responded. "I sincerely doubt that. Izuku only got his quirk on Saturday and Mina wouldn't give people any reason to be more scared of her than they already are. Unjustly so, I'll add," Aizawa responded. The teacher opened his mouth to speak but was cut off by Aizawa. "No, the rest of those kids fear those too because of what they look like and what their quirks are, and you don't seem to have done anything to help change that." The teacher shrugged dismissively. "That's not my job. I don't have to make them all be friends with each other or even like each other. No, your job is to protect and teach them, and frankly, you're not doing a good job either way. You're failing to protect two children from discrimination, and by allowing it to happen, you're teaching the rest of the class that there is nothing wrong with that, Aizawa informed him angrily. Now that is quite enough, Mr. Aizawa. I called you here to discuss your son's behavior, and frankly, I see where he gets it from now, the teacher responded, standing up from the desk, only realizing then that Aizawa was still half a head taller than him. Aizawa chuckled. Well, he didn't get my good looks, so he had to get something. The teacher just glared at him for a second. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, those two attacked their classmates unprompted, so they need to be punished. It's as simple as that. I called you here as a courtesy to inform you of what was happening. Aizawa just looked at the teacher for a second, his head tilted to the side slightly. Tell me, the ones who were apparently attacked, are they here today? The teacher nodded. They'll be with the rest of the class now. Aizawa pulled a phone out of his pocket. Good, then I suppose you won't mind me calling a friend to get to the bottom of this, will you? The teacher frowned. No, you are not bringing anyone here. I will not let them in. Aizawa was already holding the phone to his ear. With all due respect, he's a police detective and I'm a pro hero. You really can't stop me, Aizawa informed him, enjoying the look of panic on the teacher's face. The phone was soon answered. Hey Eraser, how can I help you? Tsukachi greeted. Hey Tsukachi, are you busy at the minute? I need your help quickly, Aizawa asked. Well, a little bit. I'm on my way to Yavin preschool at the minute. They asked me to do a talk on misuse of quirks, he explained. Aizawa glared at the teacher, who shrunk under his suddenly more intimidating gaze. I see. That's a coincidence, as I'm there right now and I was going to ask you to come here anyway. Oh, well, that is odd. Anyway, I'm nearly there. Just be a few minutes, he added. All right then, see you in a few, Aizawa said before hanging up. Once he put the phone away, he glared at the teacher once more. So, you were having a police detective come in and talk to the kids about quirk misuse? The teacher nodded nervously. Well, I hope it won't affect your plans too much if we have him find out exactly what happened on Saturday before the talk then, Aizawa added, turning to leave the office. Aizawa left the room, Mina and Izuku waiting just outside. Come on you two, let's go wait by the doors, Tsukachi's coming. The pair nodded, following behind him quietly. The detective arrived just a minute or so later, quickly spotting Aizawa and the kids at the door. Hey Eraser, what did you need help with? He asked. Aizawa gestured over his shoulder. Come with us, we need your quirk to find out what happened. Tsukachi nodded and followed behind the group, giving Izuku and Mina a big smile as he did. They soon reached the office. Aizawa opened the door to find the teacher still there, looking slightly paler than he was earlier. The detective is here, go and get the three boys, Aizawa instructed. The teacher hesitated. Now, commanded Aizawa, his quirk flashing and making his hair rise up. The teacher quickly slid past him out the door and went running to the classroom. A minute later, he led the three boys back into the room. Aizawa immediately noticed they all looked smug. So then, which one of you is Bakugo? Aizawa asked sternly. The spiky-haired blonde stepped forward. That's me. Who the hell are you? I'm Eraserhead. I'm a pro hero and this is a friend of mine, Detective Tsukachi. We're going to find out exactly what happened last Saturday, he said with a small grin on his face. Everyone in the room noticed that the three boys all gained a look of panic on their faces. The teacher paled even more at that realization. Now then, the way this'll work is simple. I say what happened, you say if it was true or not. Got it? Aizawa asked, looking the three boys over. Each of them nodded, Bakugo most reluctantly. First of all, the most important question, did Midoriya and Ishido attack you three unprompted? Aizawa demanded. Yeah, they did, they're monsters, cried the fatter boy. Aizawa clenched his teeth at the monster comment but stayed quiet, looking towards the other two. And? You two have anything to say? He asked. Bakugo scoffed. What he said, they're monsters and villains and I'm going to be a hero, so they attacked us? That's a lie, Tsukachi said. What are you talking about, Gumshoe? Bakugo demanded. My quirk is called Lie Detector. 3 guesses what it does, he responded. The three boys' eyes all widened with nervousness. Next question, did you hurt or try to hurt either of Midoriya or Ishido? Aizawa demanded. No, we didn't. Bakugo nearly screamed. That's another lie, Tsukachi informed everyone, his eyes narrowing at the three boys. Did you use your quirks to hurt either of them? Aizawa asked. No. Bakugo hollered. That's a lie, Tsukachi told them. Did they use their quirks in self-defense? Aizawa asked. No. They attacked us. Bakugo screeched. Another lie, Tsukachi said. Did you lie to the teacher to try and get them in trouble? Aizawa asked. No, we didn't. They attacked you. She burned my hand. Bakugo shouted. Partial lie, said the detective. Aizawa turned to Mina. Did you burn his hand? Yeah, she admitted quietly. Why? He asked softly. He was pulling my hair and hurting me. I didn't mean to, I just panicked, she explained nervously. That's the truth, Tsukachi added. No, it isn't. She meant to do it. Bakugo screamed, nearly throwing a tantrum now. Be quiet now, Tsukachi ordered him. Nearly every word that had come out of your mouths since I got here have been lies. What exactly do you have to say for yourselves? You're lying too. I bet your quirk isn't what you said it is. I bet you're just lying for them. Bakugo screamed. Aizawa just sighed. A kid that wanted to be a hero, first he attacks his son and his best friend, and now he does nothing but lie and wail like a baby. I think that's all we need to hear then, Aizawa said, sighing again. Get out of here, you three. Go back to class, he ordered. Excuse me, you can't tell them what to dash, the teacher spoke up from behind him. I'm a pro hero, yes I can, now shut up and sit back down, he commanded, glaring at him over his shoulder. Yes sir, the teacher muttered, retaking his seat. Aizawa turned his attention back to the three boys. Go on, get out, go back to your class. They reluctantly complied, shuffling out of the office. Aizawa turned back to the teacher, now slumped back into his chair. Now then, I think we have all the evidence we'd need to sue the school. Would you agree, detective? Tsukachi nodded. I'd say so. Schools have been sued with less evidence before. The teacher looked panicked at the idea. Now then, if you want to avoid that outcome, there are several things you're going to do, Aizawa informed him. First of all, Tsukachi is going to make the talk he came here to do, and you are going to let him name and shame the three boys that have lied today. The teacher seemed to grow paler with every word. Secondly, I'll be paying attention to this place for a while longer. If I see any more signs of this kind of chronic incompetence again, I will let the press go wild on you, Aizawa informed him. Lastly, I'm removing Izuku and Mina from here as students immediately. I don't trust you or the other people here to do your jobs properly. The teacher interjected at that last one. Hang on, you can remove Izuku since you're his guardian, but you can't remove someone else's child. I'm a pro hero with all the powers and rights that come with that title. I am allowed to remove children from unfit guardians. Normally that would be used for parents, but this would be just as valid. Aizawa snapped back at him. You don't have a leg to stand on here, so do keep quiet. The teacher just nodded, cowed by the intimidating presence of the pro. His demands made, Aizawa turned to Izuku and Mina, who were both stood by the door, having remained quiet this whole time. Sorry about that, you two. Why don't we get out of here? I'll get you some ice cream on the way home. The pair's faces lit up with smiles. Aizawa nodded happily before turning to Tsukachi. Sorry for dropping you in it again, he apologized. Tsukachi just smirked and waved his hand. Don't worry about it, it's good for Izuku, so I've got no problems with helping out. Thanks, detective. Aizawa thanked again before holding his hands out for the two kids to take. Come on then guys, let's get you out of here. Aizawa walked off with Izuku and Mina in tow, leaving the detective with a pale and shaking teacher. That was not what he had expected to happen today. He thought he'd be punishing badly behaved kids, not getting threatened by a pro hero. As promised, Aizawa did get them both ice cream on the way home. Once they had all reached his and Izuku's apartment, he called Mina's parents, informing them of the situation. They were both in agreement that Aizawa had done the right thing, saying they would be there to talk about what had happened once their shifts were over. While the two kids were a little bit shaken up over seeing Aizawa being so intimidating, neither of them felt scared of him at all, since they knew he was entirely on their side and was only angry at the school. A few hours later, the Ishidos arrived to discuss what would be done now. It was eventually decided that they would be homeschooled until the time came for them to go to elementary school. Since Aizawa didn't work during the day and was willing to, they agreed that Mina could learn from him during the day. Aizawa wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the idea given that it would cut into his precious sleep schedule, but since it would benefit Izuku and Mina, he agreed to do so. And so, for the next 2 years, Izuku and Mina were taught by Aizawa during the week, occasionally being taught by Hizashi or Namuri instead if they could get time off to give Aizawa a bit of a break. Surprising everyone, including Aizawa himself, he actually turned out to be a very good teacher. Then came the time to go to elementary school. Izuku and Mina were understandably nervous, but they were also looking forward to it at the same time. The pair met up on their first day at Aizawa's apartment in their uniforms before he would take them to their first day there. Once they arrived, they soon found where to go, waving goodbye to Aizawa as they entered the school. Luckily they were in the same class, but even more luckily, neither Bakugo nor his cronies were in their class. The first thing the teacher had the class do as an icebreaker was to all share their names and their quirks. That immediately made Izuku and Mina nervous, scared that people would immediately say they were villains again. One by one, each student went up to the front, giving their names and quirks. Most people's quirks were fairly minor, not having many practical uses or just affecting their appearances. Then it came time for Izuku to share. Gulping nervously, he stepped up to the front of the class. "Hi there, I'm Izuku Midoriya and I call my quirk necromancy. It lets me control shadows," he explained, summoning surrounding shadows into a small ball in his hand. He waited for the jeers and taunts to begin, but they never came. Instead, most in the class looked at him with, "Was that jealousy? Wow, that's so cool. I wish I had that quirk," a boy from the back called, prompting more of the class to share similar wishes. Izuku just blushed and retook his seat as the teacher calmed the class down. It was Mina's turn next, and she was still understandably nervous. "Hiya," she greeted, trying to sound chipper. "I'm Mina Ashido. My quirk is called Infernal Blaze. It lets me make this flammable jelly stuff out of my skin and set myself on fire," she explained, igniting a small fire in the palm of one of her hands. Once again, nobody seemed scared of her, at least nobody said they were. Instead, more people said they thought her quirk was cool, several people also saying they wished they had her quirk. Noticeably happier, Mina skipped back to her seat beside Izuku as the rest of the class finished sharing their names and quirks. Their first actual lesson had just started when the door opened and a boy being escorted by another teacher walked in. "Sorry to interrupt, this young man got here a bit late. The reason was accepted by the principal, so it's fine. Just dropping him off before I head to my class," the teacher explained. Izuku's new teacher nodded. "No problem, go and sit in that empty chair there," they said as they pointed at the seat just behind Izuku. Izuku got a decent look at the boy as he walked past him. Weirdly, he looked a lot like his dad. He had the same tired eyes and a similar hairstyle. The only thing that was different was his hair color. His was a shade of indigo. The boy didn't say anything as he took his seat, just took a pencil case out of a bag and got ready for the lesson. Once lunch came around, Izuku and Mina went around the class, talking to some of their new classmates, getting to know some of them. At one point Izuku noticed the boy that was late was still sat by himself at his desk, eating his lunch in silence. "He looks lonely, let's go say hi to him," Izuku said to Mina, gesturing in his direction. Mina nodded in agreement and they were about to walk in that direction when one of their new classmates stopped them. "Hang on guys, you don't want to talk to him," she warned them. "Why not?" Mina asked, tipping her head to the side in confusion. "His quirk is brainwashing. He can control you just by talking to you. He's definitely going to be a villain with a quirk like that one day," she told them as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Izuku and Mina exchanged pained glances. They had begun to think that there wasn't any more bullying based on quirks now that they were in elementary school. As it turns out, they just weren't the victims for once. This gave them a unique perspective of what the other kids in their class must have seen. They could join the larger group just by shunning one that the others decided was bad. But they knew what he must have been through. They had gone through that themselves. Ignoring the girl's words, they both walked towards the indigo-haired boy, pulling the chairs from their desks closer to sit down with him. "Hi there, I'm Izuku Midoriya. This is Mina Ashido. What's your name?" Izuku asked softly. The boy flinched slightly, like he wasn't expecting anyone to talk to him. Or because he was used to not being spoken to so quietly. But why are you talking to me? He asked quietly as if he wasn't used to talking. Because we want to be friends with you, that's why, Mina responded. But do you know what my quirk is? The boy asked, sounding both confused and nervous. Izuku nodded quickly, smiling widely. Yeah, that girl said you can brainwash people. That's such a cool quirk. You could do so many things with that, Izuku answered excitedly. The boy seemed taken aback by Izuku's excitement over his quirk. But it's a villain's quirk, that's what everyone says, the boy muttered sadly. Mina shook her head. No, it isn't. There's no such thing as a villain's quirk. My quirk lets me make fire and Izuku her controls shadows. People used to say that because of what we looked like and our quirks that we were both monsters and villains too. Izuku nodded. Right, but we're not. We're going to be heroes someday. We want to help people and prove them wrong. For once, the violet-haired boy looked up and made eye contact with the pair, something that looked almost like admiration shining in his eyes. You want to be heroes too? Even with villains' quirks? He asked disbelievingly. They both nodded, smiling widely. Yeah, like Mina said, there's no such thing as a villain's quirk. Anything could be a villain's quirk. It just depends on how you use it, Izuku responded. My dad's a pro hero. He said that a while ago, saying that if someone like Endeavor or All Might wanted to be villains, basically nobody could stop them. Actually, that's not true, Mina said, gaining an excited grin and a twinkle in her eyes. You could stop them, she said, getting closer to the shy boy. He recoiled quickly at what she said. What? What do you mean I could stop them? Izuku nodded, understanding what Mina meant. Oh yeah, you could brainwash them and make them surrender to the police. You could be a great hero. You can beat powerful villains without even having to fight them, he explained excitedly. The shy boy just looked at his own hands. I could be a great hero? You really mean that? He asked, barely loud enough to be heard, as if anyone heard it, he would get in trouble. Izuku and Mina both nodded. Of course you can be great, they both told him confidently. The boy stayed silent for a few seconds before looking back up at them both. You really think I can be a hero? Even knowing about my quirk and you still want to be friends with me? He asked, the burgeoning embers of determination beginning to shine in his eyes. Izuku and Mina both nodded, not a shred of doubt in either of them. The boy grinned happily. All right then, my name's Hitoshi Shinso, it's great to meet you, he greeted happily. Over the next few months, Izuku and Mina's ever-growing group of friends and family readily accepted Hitoshi into their ranks. Aizawa in particular was always happy whenever Izuku and Mina brought him to his apartment after school. Once Aizawa learned of Hitoshi's wish to be a hero, he reaffirmed to Izuku and Mina that once they started middle school, he would begin training them and he would do the same for Hitoshi too. Despite things all being well at home, things were not all fine at school. Since Mina and Izuku had befriended Hitoshi, the rest of their class had shunned them too, most of them knowing the violet-haired boy from preschool and still fearing him and his powers. Despite this, none of the trio cared. Izuku and Mina had a new friend who had gone through the same things they had, and Hitoshi had true friends for the first time, ones who understood and supported him. Truly, he felt happier with them than he did when he was with his own family. But then, one day, Hitoshi turned up to school with a black eye. Izuku and Mina immediately demanded to know what happened. Hitoshi just waved them off, saying he was just clumsy and bumped into a table. They weren't convinced but dropped it. They did, however, inform Aizawa of this. He too wouldn't push this any further until he thought it was anything but an accident, but he kept a closer eye on the violet-haired boy. Then, about a week later, Hitoshi just didn't turn up for school. Obviously, Izuku and Mina were worried, but there was nothing they could do while still at school. They came up with the idea of going to his house to see if he was there, but they realized that neither of them knew where he lived. He had been to their houses plenty of times, but they had never been to his. They started to think there might have been a reason for that. Obviously, they told Aizawa as soon as he picked them up from school. He soon called Tsukachi and had him find Hitoshi's address for him, which he soon did. Aizawa drove the home of the Shinsos, leaving Izuku and Mina in the car as he went to the apartment that Tsukachi had found for him. As he walked down the hallway, approaching the apartment, he heard shouting coming from further down the hallway and he saw an elderly woman peeking out of one of the doors. She turned to look at him as he approached. "Oh good, are you a hero?" she asked, seeing his jumpsuit and scarf. Aizawa immediately went into business mode. "I am, ma'am, what's the problem?" he asked. She pointed down the corridor. "I called the police a few minutes ago about the shouting. I don't know what's going on but I'm worried about their son," she told him. "Is the shouting coming from the Shinsos?" he asked, getting ready to make a run for the door. "Yes, how do you know them?" the elderly woman asked. "Family friend, excuse me, I'll go see what the issue is," he told her, walking briskly down the hallway and knocking on the door with purpose. The shouting immediately stopped, and the door was opened after about 10 seconds. A face peered out from behind the cracked open door, still locked with a chain. A woman with a similar hair shade to Hitoshi peered out, glaring at Aizawa. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded. Aizawa showed her his hero license. "I'm Eraserhead, I'm a pro hero. I overheard shouting coming from here and wanted to make sure there were no issues," he responded calmly, attempting to peer behind her into the apartment. "Yes, we're all fine, now leave us alone," the woman snapped, closing the door. Aizawa put his foot in the doorframe, preventing the door from closing. "I'm sorry ma'am but I heard from a neighbor that there is a child in here. In such situations I am obliged by law to make sure the child is safe," he lied. The woman huffed angrily. "Get over here Hitoshi, someone wants to see you," she snapped over her shoulder. There was a pause of about 10 seconds before the woman moved out of the way and Hitoshi appeared through the door crack. Aizawa immediately saw two things. First of all, there was a fresh bruise on his cheek. Second of all, he was wearing a muzzle. Aizawa knelt to his level and whispered as quietly as he could. "Hitoshi, please tell me now, do you want my help?" he asked, barely able to be heard. Hitoshi gave a barely visible nod, his eyes wide with fear. Aizawa nodded. "Step away from the door, find somewhere safe for a minute," he instructed. Hitoshi nodded in understanding and scampered away. Almost as soon as he was gone, the woman reappeared. "There, you saw him, now get lost," she demanded. "I'm afraid I can't do that ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to open the door," he instructed. "No, why the hell should I do that?" she snapped. "Because I believe that child is being abused and if you do not open the door willingly, I will force it open," Aizawa warned her. The woman immediately snarled, pushing him with all her might, just barely enough for his foot to be pushed out of the doorframe, and she slammed the door shut. He heard a lock being shut on the other side before more screaming. "Come here you little sheet. What did you tell him? I'm gonna beat your butt," she screamed from inside. Aizawa shook his head. That. He took a step back, swinging his foot into the door. The cheap and flimsy door frame giving way almost instantly. That was something most people never thought about. It didn't matter how good your locks were if the door frame was weak. He instantly burst into the apartment, shouting that he was a pro hero, eyes scanning the area as quickly as possible. Just out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a large man charging him with a baseball bat out of a kitchen area. He dodged out of the way, wrapping his capture weapon around the bat and ripping it out of the man's hands, throwing it to the side. As he did so, he got a better look at the man. He had a similar hairstyle to himself and Shinso except his was black, much like Aizawa's own hair. He was clearly out of shape, but he still held a core of solid muscle, presumably from some manual labor type work. "Get out of my way, sir, I'm a pro hero," Aizawa commanded. The man growled and grabbed a knife from a chopping board next to him. "I don't care if you're effing All Might himself, you ain't coming in here." Aizawa huffed. He didn't have time for this, he needed to get to Hitoshi now. Before the man could even react, Aizawa's fist flew forward, impacting squarely with his nose, a resounding crunch noise coming from the man's face. He immediately went limp and collapsed to the ground, taking several small appliances with him as he tried to grab onto something as he lost consciousness. He heard a crash come from another room and saw Hitoshi come scrambling out, eyes wide with panic. "Get out of here Hitoshi, get outside to my car, Izuku and Mino let you in," Aizawa instructed, immediately standing between him and the door he came out of. Hitoshi nodded and ran for the door. As Aizawa watched him leave out of the corner of his eye, he watched the purple-haired woman appear from what was clearly his bedroom, a studded belt in hand. Seeing Aizawa standing in her apartment and the man unconscious behind him made her shriek with rage and swing the belt at him. Aizawa barely ducked underneath it, the tip of the leather belt whipping past him with an audible snap. In response, Aizawa flung his capture weapon at her, wrapping it around her neck and pulling her towards him. As she lost her balance and fell forward, Aizawa's knee found its way to her face, resulting in another crunch and loss of consciousness. As the adrenaline began to fade, Aizawa took a second to look around the apartment. It was an absolute shithole. The furniture was dirty, torn and worn. The whole place stunk of cigarette smoke and what was probably some kind of lingering smell from some form of drag, and the unconscious man in the kitchen stunk of alcohol. As Aizawa set about securing the two adults in the apartment, he heard more people entering the apartment. Peering around the corner, he saw two police officers entering the apartment, pistols drawn. He held an arm out. "Over here, officers," he called out. Both of their gazes immediately snapped to him. "Who are you?" one of them demanded, his pistol aimed at Aizawa. Aizawa slowly stood up, walking around the corner with his hands up. "I'm Eraserhead. I'm a pro-hero," he told them. The one who asked who he was scoffed. "How come I've never heard of you then?" he demanded. "I'm an underground hero. It's my job to be unknown," Aizawa responded. "I'm getting my ID out of my pocket. Just relax," he warned them, slowly getting his hero license out of his pocket. He handed it to one of them, who examined it. The officer handed it back to him and holstered his pistol. "Relax, it's legit, he's a hero," he said to the other one, who still had his gun out. He grudgingly holstered his own gun before huffing and moving past Aizawa to inspect the apartment. The clearly calmer officer stepped closer to Aizawa. "We got sent here because a neighbor was reporting lots of shouting and screaming. What are you doing here?" he asked. "Hang on, did you pass a purple-haired kid on the way here?" Aizawa. The officer nodded. "Yeah. He said someone had told him to get outside. We just told him to stay where he was." Aizawa nodded. "Right, give me a sec," he said before walking to the door and peering down the corridor, seeing Hitoshi knelt next to the elevator, the elderly lady from earlier comforting him. Aizawa turned back to the officer, glad Hitoshi was safe. "Sorry about that. Anyway, long story short, my son is good friends with that kid and he told me he didn't turn up for school today. I was already concerned he may have been abused when he came to school with a black eye a week ago, so I got a detective friend of mine to find the address. I was just coming here to make sure he was all right." The officer nodded. "So you knew the kid before this?" "Yeah, his name's Hitoshi Shinso. I assume these two are his parents, although I've never met them before," Aizawa confirmed. The officer nodded. "Right, well, we'll take these two to the station. Can I trust you to bring the boy so he can give a statement?" Aizawa nodded in affirmation. "All right then, make your way there now. I'll call in and let them know you're coming," the officer instructed him. Aizawa nodded, turning and leaving the apartment, making his way over to Hitoshi. The old woman stepped out of his way as he approached. Aizawa knelt down to the boy. "Hey Hitoshi, you're all right. They're not going to hurt you anymore," he reassured him. Hitoshi looked up at Aizawa, his eyes full of tears and the muzzle still on his face. Aizawa reached into one of the pockets on his jumpsuit and pulled out a lock-picking kit. "Here, let me get that thing off you," he offered. Hitoshi nodded, turning his back to Aizawa and moving his hair out of the way so he could see the lock on the back of it. Within less than a minute, there was a click and the two halves of the muzzle fell away. As soon as it was off, Hitoshi took in a deep breath through his mouth. Apparently the muzzle hampered his breathing. Once he had caught his breath, Hitoshi threw his arms around Aizawa. "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa. Thank you for saving me," he thanked, tears streaming down his face. Aizawa wrapped his arms around Hitoshi, rubbing his back and trying to calm him down. "You're welcome, Hitoshi. I'm sorry I didn't help you earlier." Hitoshi sniffled and shook his head. "It's okay, you couldn't know." Aizawa rubbed his back a few more times before picking Hitoshi up, holding him like he used to hold Izuku when he was a toddler. "Come on, Izuku and Mina are in the car. They've been worried about you," he said as he stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the ground floor. Hitoshi sniffled again. "I'm sorry for making you worry. I didn't mean to." Aizawa gently rubbed his shoulder. Hey, it's alright, they were worried about you because they're your friends. I was worried about you too. I'm just glad I managed to help you. By this point, Aizawa had reached the front door of the apartment building and was walking back to his own car. He put Hitoshi down as he reached it, unlocking the door and letting Hitoshi into the passenger seat. As Aizawa retook his seat behind the wheel, Izuku and Mina had leaned forward in their seats, fretting over Hitoshi's new injuries as he slapped their hands away, saying he was fine. Right then, we need to go to the police station so that you can give the police a statement about what happened, Aizawa explained to Hitoshi. Hitoshi nodded. Alright, if I have to. Aizawa reached over and ruffled his hair. I know you don't want to, but it's important. Hitoshi nodded again. I know. It's alright, I'll be fine. Aizawa nodded approvingly. Good man, make sure you're buckled up. The four of them were at the police station for about 2 hours as Aizawa explained what had happened in greater detail while Hitoshi gave as many details about what had happened to him over the years as he could. Once the police were satisfied, the conversation turned to who he would be staying with. Aizawa immediately offered to house him. The police were less than enthusiastic at the idea, saying it would be better for Hitoshi to stay with family. It was only when Hitoshi told the police that he didn't have any other family that they relented and allowed Aizawa to take guardianship of him. It was when they were on their way home that Aizawa realized what had just happened. He just got another kid. He was barely weeks away from being able to officially adopt Izuku, and now he had another kid too. He chuckled quietly to himself. He would not have seen this happening a few years ago. He wouldn't have thought he'd have one kid, never mind two. He had already informed Hizashi and Nemuri about what had happened. After convincing them to not break into the police station to rip his parents' throats out for hurting their little lavender child, they had agreed to immediately get to work, Hizashi heading over to Hitoshi's apartment to fetch as many of his belongings as he could and Nemuri setting up a place for him to sleep in Aizawa's apartment. The four had barely entered the apartment when Hitoshi was immediately grabbed into a hug from Nemuri. Hitoshi gratefully returned the hug. Those two had gotten along like a house on fire since Izuku and Mina brought him home for the first time. Not too long after, Hizashi arrived at the apartment with several bags full of Hitoshi's clothes and possessions. As soon as the blonde hero saw said lavender child, he too snatched him up into a hug. The others smiled at the happy expression on Hitoshi's face. Finally, he seemed to be in a home filled with love. Hizashi agreed to cook a big meal for everyone and they all dined together, Mina's parents also joining them for the meal, the air being light and jovial, with no mention of what had happened that day. Once Mina had been taken home and Izuku and Hitoshi had gone to bed, Aizawa gave his friends the details of what had happened. At this point, neither of them were surprised that Aizawa had decided to take him in. It just seemed to be his way now. Eventually, they also left after promising to help Aizawa with whatever he needed, just like they had done when he took in Izuku. The next day, Aizawa called the school, informing them of what had happened and that Izuku and Hitoshi would be taking the next few days off while he settled in. While the school was hesitant to allow the time off for both the students, they soon changed their tune once Aizawa told them about exactly what happened the last time he got in an argument with a teacher. Aizawa had kept his promise. He had kept his eye on that preschool Izuku and Mina went to, even after pulling them out. And, just like he promised, upon realizing that every teacher in that place was exactly the same as the one he had spoken to, he leaked information about the kind of bullying they allowed to happen there to the media. He may not have liked the media, but they could be a useful tool for such things. The school shut down practically overnight, most teachers losing their teaching licenses and one even being jailed. Upon being informed of this fact, the school decided it would be best to not anger the scary pro-hero and just let it happen, allowing both Izuku and Hitoshi as much time off as they needed. Over the next week, Hitoshi soon settled in, much quicker than anyone expected. Mina, of course, was coming by daily immediately after school and staying practically until bedtime. At the start of the next week, all three kids went back to school. There was a slightly different atmosphere around the school now, particularly in their class. Before, the rest of the class treated the villain trio with disdain. Now, practically sensing the strengthened bond between the three of them, nobody dared mess with them. It was only on rare occasions that anyone did over the next few years, and even then, it was only people from outside of their class. It didn't matter which one of them the target was, if any one of them was in trouble, the other two were right there by their side as soon as possible. The three got in their fair share of fights over their time at their elementary school, each one earning at least one suspension during their time there. Aizawa, frankly, couldn't have been prouder of them. He didn't care about them getting in trouble as long as they protected each other. He had officially adopted Izuku not long after taking in Hitoshi. Izuku chose to keep his family name, partially because he liked the name, partially for his own safety. It would be best if making the link between Aizawa and Izuku was trickier in case any villains tried to get revenge for something. In their 5th year of elementary school, not long after all three of their birthdays, coincidentally, all being in July and being around 2 weeks apart from each other, Aizawa also officially adopted Hitoshi into the family too. He also chose to keep his family name for much the same reasons as Izuku. Hitoshi's parents had both been charged with child abuse and sentenced to 25 years each in prison. As it happened, it was the same judge that passed their sentence as the one who had presided over Izuku's mother's trial years before. Aizawa liked this judge. He was harsh to those that deserved it. After Hitoshi had been taken in, they had done some rearranging of their apartment. Aizawa had relinquished his room to his 2 boys and he took their old room, saying they needed the space more than he did. Mina ended up staying at their place, so often they started joking that she should just move in too. Then, just as the 3 kids were finishing their last year of elementary school, Aizawa received a phone call from the Ishidos. He answered, hearing Kira's voice on the other side. "Hey Kira, what can I help you with?" "Hey Shota, I was wondering if you would be able to do us a colossal favor?" she asked slightly hesitantly. "Depends on what it is, but I can try my best. What do you need?" Aizawa asked. "Well, Kaido just received a job offer. It's an amazing job with great pay and benefits. The only problem is that it's in America," she explained. Aizawa hummed slightly in understanding. "I see, what can I do to help then?" "Well, he's accepted the job offer and I'll be moving with him, but neither of us want to separate Mina from Izuku or Hitoshi. I don't even think we'd be able to, frankly," she explained. "I don't blame you. I don't think I'd be able to do that either," Aizawa responded. "So we were wondering if she would be able to stay with you? So she can stay with her only friends and go to UA with them like she's dreamed of for years," she requested. Aizawa was silent for a minute. "Please understand, I'm willing, but this is a big ask and my apartment isn't exactly massive now." "I understand and we're willing to help. We'd be sending money every month to help support her for as long as we're in America for," Kira explained. Aizawa sighed for a second before responding. "When are you leaving? Can you give me a bit of time to think it over?" he requested. "Of course, we leave in a few months, once Mina's finished school," Kira replied. "All right then, I'll think about it. Give me a few days and I'll get back to you," he said. "No problem, thanks for hearing me out Shota." Later, Kira said before hanging up the phone. That conversation weighed heavily on his mind for the next few days. He wanted to help and money wasn't the issue, it was just that there wasn't enough room for Mina to stay with them. He got an interesting letter. He opened it to find that it was from Principal Nizu of UA. Aizawa shuddered at reading the name. He had Nizu as a history teacher when he was at UA. That thing was one of the only things in this world that truly scared him. As he read the letter, he grew more and more intrigued. It was a job offer to become a teacher at UA. That was interesting enough. What made it even more tempting was a small addition at the end of the clearly pre-made letter. "Also, as we are aware of your current living arrangements, a house shall be provided for you and your sons on the UA campus should you accept our offer. Since the pro-hero Cementos is a staff member, building such structures is simple and quick, and so a house can be built to accommodate any needs you may have." That was almost too good to be true. And almost suspiciously good timing too. Aizawa shuddered again. He wouldn't have been surprised if Nizu had waited for this exact kind of situation in order to entice him into accepting the offer. He went through the test of the day not saying anything about the offer yet, still thinking it over. Then he received messages off Hizashi and Namuri. Apparently they had both also been offered teaching positions at UA. Okay, that DMN rat was definitely up to something. But he couldn't ignore this golden opportunity. Once Izuku and Hitoshi were asleep, he decided to call the Ishidos. Kira was the one who picked up. "Hey Shota, Did you give our request any more thought? Yeah. As it happens, a unique opportunity has presented itself, he explained. What exactly is this opportunity? She asked. I've just been offered a teaching position at UA, so have Hizashi and Namuri actually, and if I accept the offer, they said they'd provide me a house on campus and can change it to accommodate any needs, he explained. I could make sure there was enough room for Mina to stay with us too, then she can stay in Japan and it'll certainly help with the training that we were going to start once they started middle school. Kira was silent for a few seconds. Wow. That is quite the generous offer. But it's also perfect for us. Are you going to accept the offer? Yeah, I am. As long as he accepts Mina too, I'll get in touch with the principal tomorrow and let him know of my decision. If he allows me to make extra room for Mina to stay too, then I'll let you know, he informed her. Kira chuckled, clearly relieved. Thank God, Kaido and I were so worried we'd have to split Mina away from you guys. Aizawa also chuckled. Well, if tomorrow goes well, hopefully we won't need to. Right? Well, thanks so much for letting us know. Please get in touch as soon as you can tomorrow, she requested. No problem. Good night, Kira, Aizawa said, hanging up the phone. Aizawa slept restlessly that night, feeling ever so slightly like death warmed up the next morning. Not like that was too unusual in the Aizawa household. All three of them suffered from poor sleep for one reason or another. Aizawa and Hitoshi were both insomniacs and Izuku's quirk kept on waking him up while he slept. Apparently sleep paralysis demons were a whole lot more terrifying when they were physically standing in your room and made from pure darkness. The next morning, once the boys had gone off to school, Aizawa called the number on the job offer he was sent. The phone barely rang once before it was answered. Hello, Aizawa. It's been quite a while, came the ever-chipper voice from Principal Nizu on the other side of the phone. Just hearing that voice again sent shivers down Aizawa's spine. Yes, hello sir, I'm calling about the job offer you sent me, Aizawa responded, trying to remain calm. Indeed, have you decided to accept? The principal asked. I have, on 2 conditions, Aizawa informed him. Very well, let's hear them, Nizu said, tone unchanging. First of all, you talked about a house that can be changed to suit my needs. I'd like it to have 4 bedrooms, 1 for myself, 1 each for my sons and 1 for a friend of theirs who needs somewhere to stay since her parents are moving to America for work and for her to be allowed to live there with us, Aizawa requested. That will not be an issue, as long as you take responsibility for her. I have no problems with that. What was your second request? Nizu responded. I'd like to use UA's resources to train my sons and their friend. They all want to be heroes one day and I think they all have the potential to be some of the best, he finished. An interesting condition but I am willing to accept it, Nizu responded. Aizawa let out a sigh of relief he didn't realize he was holding in. Thank you, sir. In that case, I gratefully accept your offer. Excellent. I shall be in touch soon. We shall have you start at the beginning of the next school year. You may move in whenever you are ready, the principal offered. Thank you very much, sir. Have a good day, Aizawa said gratefully. You too, Aizawa. Take care, Nizu finished before hanging up. Aizawa slumped into the sofa, thankful at how that went. He sent a message to Kira, letting her know what had been agreed on. She was ecstatic, but Aizawa managed to convince her to not tell Mina until they got to his place after school. When the 3 students made it to the apartment, they found Aizawa sat at the kitchen table, 3 chairs on the other side. Hey guys, come grab a seat, I need to talk to you all for a bit, he requested. All 3 dropped their bags at their feet and took a seat each. Now then, boys, you know that Mina's parents are moving to America and that she would be going with them if she can't find anywhere to stay here, right? He asked. Izuku and Hitoshi looked downcast but nodded. Well, Kira asked if I would take you and Mina. I told her I would think on it, but the issue was that this apartment is running out of room. There's already 3 people and a cat living here, he added. Mina nodded sadly, accepting the reason he couldn't do it. But, how would you all feel if I told you that I'd been offered a job at UA that came with a house that we could all live in? The trio just stared at him for a solid minute in complete silence. What? They all screamed. Mina opened her eyes, looked at the unfamiliar ceiling above her and smiled. These past 2 weeks had been a roller coaster of emotions for her. 2 weeks ago, her parents told her about the job offer her dad got. At first she was happy for him, then they told her that it was in America, and they'd have to move. The thought of being separated from Izuku and Hitoshi made her have a slight meltdown, and she may or may not have completely incinerated an armchair. After her parents had managed to calm her down slightly and brush away the armchair ashes, they told her that they would try and find someone who would take her in so she could stay in Japan. The obvious first option was Aizawa, so Kira called him. After the call, she told her husband and Mina that he said that he was willing, but the issue was the size of his apartment not being big enough. He said, however, that he would consider it anyway but needed a couple of days. Mina wasn't entirely happy, but she couldn't blame him. It would be a big responsibility. He would basically have a daughter for however long her parents were in America for. She told Izuku and Hitoshi about the situation the next day at school but made them promise to not talk to their dad about it, saying he should think about it on his own. They were both distressed at the idea she may have to leave, but they promised not to talk to him about it. Then a few days passed, and she went back to their apartment with them, having not gone around for a few days to try and not influence Aizawa at all. I mean, she wanted to influence him, she really wanted to stay, but she didn't want to force him. When Aizawa told them all to sit down, saying he needed to talk to them, Mina got nervous, very nervous. That didn't change when he seemed like he was about to tell her that he wouldn't be able to take her in. Then came those magic words. But, how would you all feel if I told you that I'd been offered a job at UA that came with a house that we could all live in? Needless to say, all three of them lost their minds. What surprised Mina was that neither Izuku or Hitoshi were at all excited because they could live at UA. Instead, they were both ecstatic that she would be able to stay with them. She soon found herself squeezed in tight hugs from both sides from her best friends. At that moment, she couldn't have been happier. Not too long afterwards, her parents arrived. Mina was excited to tell them what Aizawa had told her. Her bubble was burst slightly when her parents told her they already knew, but she was too happy to be down for long. And so, over the next 2 weeks, the Aizawas and Mina began the process of moving. Aizawa had told the three of them that he had gone to meet Principal Nizu while they were at school to confirm details, and he had told him that the house was already prepared and waiting for them. A week after Mina got some of the best news of her life, they were ready. Her stuff was packed into boxes and most of the Aizawa's apartment had been shipped to the house already. That left Aizawa and the three kids standing in front of the UA barrier, the kids all staring, wide-eyed and mouths on the floor. Aizawa chuckled. "That doesn't change, it still blows me away now," he told them. They were stood there, gobsmacked for at least 5 minutes before someone came to meet them at the gate. "Showed Aizawa, good to see you again," came a chipper voice. All three kids snapped their eyes away from the imposing building to source of the voice in front of them. They were surprised to see a small creature in front of them. They didn't know what it could have been. It was like a cross between a dog, mouse, and a small bear. What they did know is that it had just talked and was continuing to do so. "I'd just like to say again that I'm very glad you accepted my offer. I believe that your expertise can help the future heroes we train here become the best they can be." Nizu thanked Aizawa, looking up at the much taller man. "Not a problem, sir. Thank you for choosing me," Aizawa thanked in return. Nizu nodded before turning to the three children at his side. "Hello, you may be wondering what I am. Am I a dog? A mouse? The bear? All that matters is, I'm the principal of UA," he greeted happily. The trio waved shyly, not quite expecting to be talked to by an animal today. "So these two must be your sons then, Aizawa. I must say I've been looking forward to meeting them," Nizu said, glancing back up at Aizawa. He nodded. "They are." He gently nudged Izuku with his hip. "Go on, introduce yourselves." Snapped out of his shock, Izuku gave Nizu a wide smile and held out a hand. "Hi, nice to meet you, sir. I'm Izuku Midoriya," he greeted as Nizu accepted the handshake. "Hi. I'm Hitoshi Shinso," Shinso greeted shyly. Mina skipped forward a step or two closer to Nizu. "Hiya, I'm Mina Ashido. Your fur looks really shiny. What do you use to make it so shiny?" Nizu laughed good-naturedly. "I use keratin to achieve my luscious shine. Unfortunately, it would not work for yourself, but it's good to meet you all," he said, taking a step back and looking over the three of them. Aizawa and all three of the kids nodded. "Thank you, Principal Nizu," Izuku answered. Nizu waved his hand. "Pa. Oh, no need for that. You're all going to be living here, feel free to just call me Nizu, he said, handing out 3 cards to the kids. Those are your passes, they'll let you enter UA unbothered by the security, please try not to lose them. All 4 bowed slightly as the principal took his leave. The 3 kids were in a slight state of shock as Aizawa led them to the house they would be living in. It was bigger than any of them were expecting, definitely big enough for a larger family than theirs. Then again, UA was never in the business of doing anything small. Most of the furniture from Aizawa's apartment had already been moved and set up in the house. What they didn't already have was provided by the school. Once again, Aizawa found Nizu's generosity suspicious but wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Aizawa gave them a brief tour around the house, showing them the spacious kitchen and living room downstairs and then leading them upstairs. Aizawa was given the master bedroom that doubled as a study. Each of the kids had their own bedroom, each surprisingly large with more than enough space for any hobbies they might have. Aizawa left them to unpack their stuff once they had picked their rooms. The 3 of them started packing away their respective boxes, each of them working in silence, still not quite believing where they were. They all met up in Izuku's room once they had finished unpacking, just sitting on the ground, none of them saying anything. Until Izuku just started cackling. Soon enough, all 3 of them were lying on their sides, laughing like mad, the ridiculousness of their situation finally catching up to them mentally. Mina yawned as she stretched, climbing out of bed and going to get dressed. Last night was her first night sleeping in their new house, she supposed. Surprisingly, she slept well, despite being in an unfamiliar place. Once she was dressed, she headed downstairs to the kitchen, following the sounds of conversation and the smell of frying bacon. She entered the kitchen to see Izuku and Hitoshi already sat at the large dining table, Aizawa sitting at one of ends, Nemuri sitting at another and Hizashi standing at the stove. "Good morning, Mina," Aizawa greeted as he saw her. "Morning, Shota," she yawned, stretching once more before taking a seat. "So, now all 3 of you are here, guess I should explain what me and Hizashi are doing here," said Nemuri. The kids nodded, that would be good. "Well, we're going to be teachers here too," she announced happily. The trio cheered in delight, that meant they'd get to see them much more often. "Right?" Aizawa confirmed. "Nemuri will be a hero art history teacher, Hizashi an English teacher, and I'll be a hero course teacher," he explained. The trio nodded. "What about homerooms?" Izuku asked. Aizawa snorted. "Yeah, not likely, at least not for now. Give us a couple of years to settle in first, then maybe." Mina pouted. "You better be our homeroom teacher when we come here," she warned. Aizawa laughed. "I promise, I'll do my best to make that happen." After they all ate Hizashi's massively unhealthy English fried breakfast, Aizawa took them to school. It was a bit of a surreal experience for them, to step out of their front door and see the UA campus directly in front of them. Aizawa led them to the faculty car park, them all climbing into a new car also provided by the school. Once again, Aizawa found this generosity suspicious, but then again, maybe all these benefits was why heroes that wanted to go into teaching desperately wanted to teach at UA. Aizawa snorted in amusement. He felt like he'd won the lottery just by making it into UA as a student. Now he was here as a teacher. The trio arrived at their school, a few kids taking note of their new car but not saying anything, most were still too scared of them to do anything. This had long stopped bothering them, they didn't need anyone else, as long as they had each other, they didn't care about anyone else. And so, the 3 finished their last year at elementary school, each doing very well in the final exams. It was clear to each of them that Izuku was the most gifted academically, but he was very much a no man left behind kind of a guy, so he helped tutor the other 2, making each of their grades the highest in the class. They enjoyed a relaxing break after school ended while Aizawa prepared for his role as a teacher to begin. Soon enough, the new school year began and Izuku, Mina and Hitoshi made their way to their first day at Aldra Junior High. Izuku and Hitoshi quite liked the sailor-like uniforms, Mina, not quite as much, although she did like that the predominantly black uniform complemented her skin and hair color so she could accept it. Making their own way to school for once, Aizawa believing they were old enough to make it on their own, was a bit of a weird experience as they got a few funny looks from the few UA students walking around the campus that early as they left. They soon made it to Aldra with no issues, at least until they found out who would be in their class. Deku, came a familiar shout from a desk near the windows. Oh crap, muttered Izuku, his head dropping into a hand. Oh well, this is just great, Mina ummed. Hitoshi looked between the two of them and the spiky-haired blonde that just shouted at his brother. Am I missing something? He asked, confused. Yeah, long story, tell you later, Izuku said as they went to their assigned seats. Fortunately, they were all sat quite far away from Bakugo, the angry blonde being on the other side of the room. Not too long later, the teacher entered the room. Izuku immediately knew this would be trouble. He and Mina recognized this one as one of the teachers from the preschool that Aizawa got shut down. Good morning, class. Good to see that everyone is here, he greeted, his eyes passing over the class, freezing when he recognized Izuku and Mina. Izuku Midoriya, get out of my class now, ordered the teacher. Izuku heard Bakugo snort from the other side of the room. No, why would we do that? Izuku demanded. Because I refuse to teach you, now get the hell out, the teacher ordered. Nope, Mina replied casually, crossing her legs on her desk. Izuku did the same, leaning back in his chair and resting his head in his hands. The teacher had gone bright crimson at this point. I said get out now. I will not teach you too, he shouted. Neither of them flinched. Izuku just examined his nails. Sir, he began, I hope I don't have to remind you what happened the last time a school allowed discrimination against us, he said casually. The teacher visibly froze at that. To be honest, I'm quite surprised they let you keep your license. You were just as complicit as the others. Also tell me, when does the principal get out of jail? Didn't he get like 15 years or something? Izuku asked, voice staying as casual as it had been. The class was silent, the teacher was still scarlet, and the rest of the class just stared at them with wide eyes and dropped jaws. Bakugo just looked like he was silently seething. They could practically hear the sound of his teeth grinding together. The teacher took in a deep breath before replying. Both of you are being disruptive. This is not a good precedent to set and I have no reason to believe this will change. Therefore, I'm expelling the both of you right now, he told them. Izuku and Mina just shrugged. Sure, whatever, Izuku replied, leaning down and grabbing his bag, Mina and Hitoshi following suit as he stood up. The three began walking to the door when the teacher spoke up. Hang on a second, you with the purple hair, where are you going? The teacher asked sternly. Hitoshi turned back to the teacher. You've expelled my brother and best friend over nothing. I'm not staying here. Got a problem with that? He asked, a small grin appearing on his face. Yes, I do, young Ma Dash. The teacher's eyes went blank. Hitoshi allowed his grin to settle on his face. You're a chicken now, he said as he left the room. The trio walked down the corridor, leaving the sounds of loud clucking and the sounds of scattering papers and desks behind them. Izuku and Hitoshi shared a fist bump while Mina wrapped her arms around the both of them from behind. Bakugo was left in that classroom, watching the scene with wide eyes. That was not the two monsters he used to show their place. They were way more confident than they used to be. And who was the purple-haired kid? And what the F did he just do to the teacher? Said teacher was currently stood atop a student's desk, holding his arms like a chicken and clucking loudly. Bakugo groaned and held his head in his hands. He really hoped he didn't see them again. They might end up giving him some trouble. The trio ended up heading straight home. They had nothing else to do, so they may as well. It didn't take them too long to arrive back at UA. They got some more strange looks as they walked through the gate, but nobody stopped them, assuming they were allowed to be here since the barrier didn't activate. They soon got back home, Izuku unlocking the door and allowing the others in. They all went and got changed out of their uniforms into loose clothing, deciding they may as well start some training on their own. Aizawa had given the three a brief tour around the campus, showing them the places they would be allowed to use, even while still just living there and not being students. Nizu had informed all the faculty of the circumstances surrounding them, so none of them batted an eyelid at seeing them around the campus. It was a bit weird for the students to see three kids walking around, but they ignored them for the most part. Not having anything else to do, the three decided to do some basic exercises in the garden of their house, ignoring any looks they got from passing students. It wasn't that long until Aizawa arrived, panting as if he had ran all the way there. Hey guys, what are you all doing here? Why aren't you at school? He gasped, catching his breath. Izuku paused his stretches. Me and Mina got expelled. Hitoshi walked out with us, he explained. Aizawa froze for a second. Wait, what? How did you get expelled that quickly? He asked, almost sounding impressed. Mina spoke up, in the middle of a set of stretches. Our teacher turned out to be one of the ones from our preschool. He said he'd refuse to teach us, and when we didn't leave he said we were being disruptive and that we weren't going to change or something, so he expelled us, she explained, continuing her stretches as she spoke. Aizawa nodded. Okay then, I'll deal with that in a bit, but why is Hitoshi here? Hitoshi scoffed. They just expelled my brother and my best friend over literally nothing, like hell I was staying there. Aizawa chuckled. Good on you, he said proudly. He stood in thought for a minute. Right, well I'll have to head down to the school and knock some heads together regardless, but then there's the matter of if you want to go back there? The trio looked at each other, each shaking their heads slightly. Izuku turned to face his dad. Doesn't look like any of us do. Aizawa nodded. All right then, we'll come up with something. I need to head back to the main building. I've got my first class soon, but I'll have a talk with the principal as soon as I can. The trio nodded. All right, see you later, Dad, Hitoshi said as he began walking off. Once Aizawa had gone, the three went back to their exercises for an hour or two until they were all tired and sweaty. They went inside to get some food and a drink. Hitoshi made all three of them sandwiches for lunch while Izuku and Mina were sat at the table, panting heavily. After they ate, they took turns showering and getting changed into less sweaty clothes, and then they all ended up just killing the next few hours in front of the TV until Aizawa arrived. Hey guys, how are you? He asked as he walked through the door. All three nodded. Good, how was your first day at school? Izuku asked him, smirking. Aizawa snorted, amused. Not as bad as I was expecting. I'll need to get used to teaching young adults now, but they weren't that bad, he answered as he took a seat. Anyway, I spoke to Nizu and told him about what had happened. Once he heard about what happened at the preschool back then and what happened today, he kind of went on a slightly terrifying yet weirdly adorable little freakout. He told them, making all three of them chuckle. Izuku and Mina had told Hitoshi about what had happened with Bakugo and the preschool on their way back to UA. Anyway, that school's in his sights now, so I'd be surprised if it's still open next week, so you'll probably not be going back there regardless, Aizawa explained. The trio nodded, none of them having any problems with that. But he then offered that unless you wanted to go to a different school, he would be willing to teach you himself, Aizawa told them. Izuku glanced at the two others. Isn't he busy being the principal? Izuku asked. Aizawa laughed as if Izuku had just told a great joke. Oh, you don't get it. That mouse is terrifying. Trust me, he'll have no problems teaching you three and running the school at the same time. The three had a quick and quiet conversation between them before turning back to Aizawa. Sure, if he's offering, we'll accept, Hitoshi responded. Aizawa nodded. All right then, he said if you did agree, to give him until next week to get ready so you've got the rest of the week off then guys, Aizawa said, looking a bit like he wanted to say something else. And may God have mercy on your souls, he muttered. Huh? What? The next few days passed fairly quickly. Aizawa congratulated them for exercising on their own that first day, but he warned them not to in future, so they weren't too tired out for his own training. Therefore, the three spent the days relaxing and the evenings training under Aizawa. Since they were still only young, he had them just trying to improve their general level of fitness rather than strength or quirk training. Part of this training was different kinds of sports. Aizawa noticed that Mina was skilled at acrobatics and dance, Hitoshi had a keen talent for athletics and basic parkour, and that Izuku had quickly picked up and was skilled at chess and basic parkour, much like Hitoshi. Aizawa noted these things down. They could be useful indicators for their skills as pros. He noted that Mina was clearly the most agile and flexible, hence why she was skilled at dance and acrobatics. Hitoshi seemed to have the most endurance, lasting much longer than the other two at exercises but still being agile enough to cope with free running. Izuku's sharp mind was obvious already, but after he won the 8th straight game of chess against Aizawa, it became even more clear. His sharp mind and instincts also helped him with his own free running, almost instinctively knowing the best paths to take. The three kids went to bed each night exhausted but satisfied. They were finally starting on their path to becoming heroes. Just like they dreamed of for years. The next week, Izuku, Mina, and Hitoshi began their lessons with Principal Nizu. They went to his office shortly before the agreed time and Izuku knocked on the door. There was a quiet click and the door opened by itself, revealing the principal sat at his big wooden desk. "Hello, you three, come in," Nizu greeted, waving them inside. Izuku entered the office, the other two following. Nizu gestured over to 3 desks to the side of the office. "Go and take a seat, I'll just be a second," he instructed. They did so, Izuku sitting in the middle, Mina on the left and Hitoshi on the right. Nizu finished writing on something on his desk before he hopped off his oversized chair and walked over to the trio with a bunch of papers in his hands. "Now then, you're not going to enjoy today, but it's important. Today you're all going to be doing several tests so that I can find out what level of education you should be at and the best way to teach you," Nizu informed them. Mina groaned quietly while Hitoshi just cringed. Smile never fading, Nizu handed out the first set of tests to the 3 of them. The day passed surprisingly quickly. While the tests were challenging, they seemed to be ones that forced you to think outside of the box often rather than just use what you know already. Despite Mina being the least academic of the 3, she had still been tutored by Izuku for the past few years, so she was doing better than she had expected. Once all of the tests were done, which took about 3 hours, Nizu just smiled at them. "Alright then, that'll be all for today. I need to go over these and work out what level of work to give you from now on so you can have the rest of the day off." The trio nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Nizu," Izuku said. Nizu nodded. "No problem, go on, relax however you want. This'll be the last day you get to do that for some time," he told them, a slight hint of danger in his tone. The 3 of them started to realize why Aizawa was so scared of him. It was over the coming weeks and years that they learned exactly why Aizawa was terrified of Nizu. He was absolutely ruthless in almost every single way. Aldra Junior High. Shut down within a week. That teacher? Arrested for child endangerment. Their schoolwork? Brutal and unforgiving. Nizu beginning to oversee their physical training? Horrific taskmaster. The 3 young teens went to bed every night physically and mentally exhausted. They were all happy they were working towards their dreams, but they weren't entirely sure they would live that long. Over the years, the 3 of them had all picked up different hobbies. Mina starting dancing and doing acrobatics, Hitoshi took up climbing and free running in his spare time. Izuku? Well, his nerdy side came out as he started going to a chess club inside UA, and he also introduced his friends and family to an old role-playing game called Dungeons & Dragons. This soon became a weekly occurrence in the Aizawa household, the 3 kids, Aizawa, Hizashi, and Nemuri meeting up for a several-hour-long session. Unfortunately, Nizu soon caught wind of this and decided to join in. As the dungeon master, the sessions were still enjoyable, but the kids started to realize truly how sadistic Nizu was when there was a situation he could control with no real-world consequences. Izuku was fairly certain that most dungeons should have had more floor space than traps, but he didn't want to say that out loud. Due to Izuku's nerdy side bleeding over to his interest in heroes, he had started keeping notebooks on hero analysis. They were detailed and thorough. Once Nizu found them, he was impressed, encouraging Izuku to continue with them. During what would have been their last year at middle school, Aizawa started training the 3 in using their quirks and more specialized training now that their fitness levels had been raised far higher than most teens their age. Nizu often came to observe these training sessions, excited at the prospect of being able to help mold promising future heroes. He knew that Aizawa was a fantastic teacher. He had proven that in the few years he had worked at UA already. These 3 would have personal training under him for years before even starting UA. They would most likely be the equal of many pros by the time they made it to UA. Nizu was ecstatic at imagining what kind of heroes they would be when they graduated UA. The first week or so of Aizawa's training was working out the limits of their quirks. Hitoshi's brainwashing was absurdly powerful, but it did have limits. He seemed to have a question answered for it to take effect, and the controlled person could be snapped out of it by a strong enough physical impact. While he knew that his quirk was powerful, he knew he couldn't rely on it for everything, so he got Aizawa to agree to giving him weapons training to give him a way to fight quirkless rather than just hand-to-hand combat. Mina's quirk was powerful and was good for both attack and mobility. Since she had worked out early that she could produce the napalm from any part of her body, She theorized that as long as she didn't light it, she could produce napalm out of the soles of her feet and use it to almost skate around. It took a fair while to get the properties of the napalm to allow her to do so, but she managed it. She also tried to find the limits of her fire resistance. It was much higher than a normal person's. She could be stood in a blazing fire and only feel hot while the people around her had to step away due to the heat. Izuku, however, practically didn't seem to have limits. He could call in shadows from at least 400 meters away and use them practically at will. He could control them almost telepathically, or he could use them more actively if he formed them into weapons or other such solid objects, or for things that require more fine motor control. One ability he quickly learned was the ability to have shadows cling to his own body to form a suit of black armor. While at first, he had to mentally control each part of the armor to allow him to move, within weeks he could do it subconsciously, allowing him to move unhampered yet heavily protected. It appeared that Izuku's only limit was his own stamina. Using techniques such as the black armor soon tired him out, leaving him unable to use his quirk for anything too complex. One day, he learned a new power entirely by accident. The trio had just finished their training for the day and were heading back to the house when Izuku tripped up over his own feet. He held his hands out in front of him, forming a veil of shadows to catch him. Then he passed through them. Izuku felt a deep chill run through his entire body and an unpleasant crawling sensation along his skin as if insects were crawling over him. He opened his eyes to realize he wasn't where he had fallen. He was under the shadow of the nearest building. He stood up, a bit shakily, and looked around in confusion. What just happened? He muttered to himself. Izuku, came the voice of Aizawa, a dozen or so meters away. What happened? How did you get there? He asked as he ran over to him. Izuku shook his head slightly, trying to dispel a sense of nausea. I don't know, I fell over, tried to catch myself with shadows, but I think I fell through them and then I ended up here. Aizawa and the other two's eyes were wide. Wait, did you teleport? Asked Hitoshi, one eyebrow ped in surprise. I think I did, Izuku responded, glancing back down at the shadows at his feet. Hang on a second, he said before he sank into the darkness at his feet. Aizawa felt a finger tap him on the shoulder and he spun around, hands held up in a fighting stance. Whoa, relax, Dad. I think I can teleport. You're not gonna punch me so soon after finding that out, are you? Izuku chuckled, holding his hands up beside his head. Aizawa relaxed slightly. No, I guess I'll let you get away with it this once. Just don't do that again, you scared me, he requested, one hand grabbing the area over his heart. Alright, I'll not scare you with it. That often, Izuku smirked. Needless to say, Nizu grew incredibly interested with the three teens' potential. He gave Aizawa full rein to use whatever UA resources he wished to in order to help train them. That was what led to the three kids being stood in front of a hero class during one of their exercises several months later. Mr. Aizawa, why are there kids here? One of the students asked. Good question, I'm going to be picking out three of you. Those three will pick one of these kids. I'll not tell you for what purpose. Aizawa responded, a dangerous smirk on his face. The students all glanced at each other nervously. Aizawa wasn't above pulling weird tricks on them to try and teach them how to be able to improvise. Aizawa stroked his chin before pointing out three students. Miruko, Hawks, Ryukyu. Come and pick one of them each, Aizawa instructed. The three students all looked at each other, slightly nervously. The first one to step forward was a dark-skinned girl with white hair and white rabbit ears sticking out of the top of her head. The three noticed a small fluffy rabbit's tail behind her and that her boots looked like a rabbit's foot. She stepped forward and grinned confidently. All right, sure thing, I guess I'll take the girl then, she said loudly. Aizawa nodded, gesturing for Mina to go and step forward to her. The next one to step forward was a young man with sandy blonde hair and large red wings. He grinned good-naturedly and waved. Over at Izuku. Come on then, kid, I like the look of you, he said. Izuku nodded and went to join him. That left the last student, a girl with chin-length blonde hair with a fringe covering her right eye. Very well then, I suppose that leaves you with me then, she said looking towards Hitoshi. Aizawa nodded as Hitoshi went to go and stand with her. All right then, you've each got a sparring partner, he announced. The whole class just stared at Aizawa, the 3 selected students in particular. You want us to fight them? Hawks asked, scratching the back of his head. They have names. Izuku spoke up from his side, his voice artificially deepened by his quirk, a little trick he figured out a while ago, a way to use the darkness on the inside of his body to partially block his vocal cords, making his voice sound much deeper than it normally is. The taller boy next to him flinched, not expecting the frankly scary voice from the teen. Oh, right, sorry, what is your name? He asked, a little bit sheepish and a little bit scared. Izuku Midoriya, he announced. Mina Ishido. Mina spoke up, looking at Miruko. Hitoshi Shinso. Hitoshi added, glancing at Ryukyu out of the corner of his eye. Hawks nodded, holding a hand out to Izuku. Alright then, good to meet you Midoriya. I'm Kigo Takami but you can call me Hawks. That's my hero name, we all choose those while we're here so we can go on dash. I know, I'm 6 years younger than you, not stupid. Izuku cut him off, voice still deep. The class noticed Aizawa not quite managed to hide an amused and maybe proud-looking smirk. Right, no, of course not. 6 years younger, huh? All of you? Hawks asked, looking at the other 2 teens, spooked by Izuku's voice once again. The other 2 nodded in affirmation. Okay then, this is bullshit Aizawa. I'm not fighting a 15-year-old kid, Miruko snapped. Aizawa chuckled. Oh yes you are, believe it or not. They asked to do something like this? Ryukyu looked down at the indigo-haired boy standing nearby. You are sure you wish to do this? We're third-year students, we've been doing this for years dash. We know, like Izuku said, we're 15 but we're not dumb, we wouldn't do this if we didn't think we could, Hitoshi responded, cutting her off. The class started growing slightly agitated at this. Who did these kids think they were? Thinking they could go up against trainee heroes. Miruko meanwhile was getting fired up. Oh I like these kids, they've got some fire in them, she said excitedly, grinning in anticipation. Mina gave a small and slightly worrying grin. You should choose your words a bit more carefully, she warned, tone teasing and amused. Aizawa clapped his hands, getting everyone's attention. Right then, you 3 pairs will be facing off against one another one at a time on this field, he announced, gesturing behind him. The students recognized it as a smaller version of the tournament arena from the sports festival. First of all, Ryukyu and Shinso, Aizawa announced, gesturing the other pairs and the class to move away. Hitoshi and Ryukyu took their positions on the opposite ends of the field. Now then, before the match starts, why can tell me why we're doing this exercise? Aizawa asked, looking over the class. A girl near the back held her hand up. Aizawa pointed to her. To get us to limit our powers to avoid injuring people too badly? Aizawa smirked. A good answer but not the right one, he replied, pointing at another raised hand. Another lesson on expecting the unexpected? A boy suggested. Technically true but also not quite the answer I was looking for, Aizawa responded, gesturing for hands to be put back down. The matches should show what I'm trying to teach you. He stepped up to the halfway point of the field, stood off to one side. Match ends when one fighter is knocked out, immobilized, yields or leaves the arena. Are both fighters ready? Both nodded. Aizawa threw his arm in the air. Begin. Hitoshi was the first to move, his opponent still apparently hesitating at the idea of fighting someone quite a bit younger than her. That was fine, he could use that. He closed most of the distance between them before she started moving, the whole class surprised at the teen's speed. Ryukyu came in with her right hook covered in pale gray scales. Hitoshi dodged it easily, using his smaller stature to duck underneath the blow and close the distance. Hitoshi saw his opponent's eye widen when she saw a glint in his hand just before he slashed a previously hidden dagger at her. He had been practicing with knives over the past few months, finding he had the most skill with them. Ryukyu just barely jumped backwards out of the way of the shining blade in his hand. Even at a glance she could tell that was a real blade. Using her strong, scale-covered legs to get more distance from her opponent, she thought she was safe. She was proved wrong when she saw that he was suddenly holding another blade in his offhand just before he threw them both at her. She dodged out of the way of one of them but the other left a gash in her cheek, even cutting a small part of her fringe off. She snarled in pain and annoyance. She hated it when things happened to her hair. She leapt forward towards her opponent again, aiming to take his head off this time. She nearly did until just before she made contact. She remembered she was fighting a 15-year-old kid and she faltered for just a second. That was the second Hitoshi was waiting for. He used her hesitation to dodge her strike and position himself just behind her as she landed. While she was still facing away from him, he drove a foot into the back of her knee, making her crumple to one knee. Also taking advantage of her arms still being raised, he drove a vicious jab right into her kidney. Ryukyu groaned in pain. For a kid, this guy had a hell of an arm on him. She held her side with one arm, rubbing it slightly, the other raised in front of her face, her vision blurred slightly from the water built up in her eyes. She shook her head and turned back round to face her opponent, who this time had made some more distance away from her. A bit more cautious this time, she stalked towards him, almost like a predator would. The two fighters circled each other for a few moments before she pounced towards him, closing the distance in an instant. She assumed he wouldn't be able to react that quickly. She was wrong. Hitoshi threw the handful of dust he had picked up while she was clearing her eyes into her face, temporarily blinding her. She missed him, ending up sliding on both her knees a short distance away from him, rubbing her eyes vigorously, trying to get the dust out. Hitoshi quickly seized the opportunity, leaping at her, clinging to her back and wrapping his legs around her torso, drawing his final hidden dagger and holding it to her throat. "Yield if you wouldn't mind," he asked, his voice almost scarily calm considering what they had just done. In a daze, Ryukyu was about to obey when she suddenly felt a feeling of deep anger from inside her. She was a dragon. She couldn't allow herself to be defeated by a child. She grabbed his arms with hers, pulling the knife away from her throat and tossing him over her shoulders, Hitoshi hitting the dusty arena ground with a thud and a pained groan, the knife clattering away out of bounds. Ryukyu growled, wiping the last of the dust out of her eyes and taking a few steps back. "All right then, no more holding back," she snarled. She fully activated her quirk, turning into a tall Western-style dragon. Hitoshi, from his position on the ground, watched this and smirked. Groaning slightly and getting to his feet, he called out to the large beast. "Well, doesn't look like I can win now. At the very least, can I know your hero name before you beat me?" he asked, a small smirk only visible to the three others who would recognize it. Ryukyu huffed in her dragon form. Shouldn't he already know it? Was he not listening earlier? "I am Ryukyu," she answered. Then her mind went blank. Hitoshi smiled. "Nice to meet you, Ryukyu. Would you mind stepping out of bounds, please?" Unable to resist, Ryukyu stomped out of bounds in her large dragon form, moving as if she was sleepwalking. As soon as she crossed the line, her mind came back to her and she whirled back around, facing her opponent still in the ring in shock. "Ryukyu is out of bounds, Shinso wins," Aizawa announced. An entire class of gobsmacked students stood behind him. Hitoshi was giving her a genuine smile. "That was a really good match. Thanks a lot for that, Ryukyu. Sorry about your fringe, I didn't mean to get that side," he called out to her, voice sounding much friendlier than it did earlier. Ryukyu just stared at him, reverting to her human form. "How? What did you just do?" she gasped. "That was my quirk. Until then I was fighting you basically quirkless," he told her, his smile not fading. The class was astounded. Not only did that kid somehow make her walk out of bounds by herself, he nearly beat her while not using his quirk at all. I see. I clearly have much to learn. However, you pulled some dirty tricks during that match," she told him, frowning at him slightly. Hitoshi shrugged as he left the pitch, walking to Aizawa's side. "Now then, Hitoshi, would you like to tell Ryukyu why she lost?" Aizawa offered. He nodded. "Sure thing," he responded before turning to face his opponent again as she approached. "You lost because you underestimated me. Simple as that. You saw a kid that you couldn't bring yourself to hurt, that gave me every opening I needed," he explained. "Also, to answer what you said earlier, yes, I used dirty tricks. I didn't fight fair, but why should I? Villains won't and heroes shouldn't. Fighting fair shouldn't mean cheat when lives are on the line. Some things are more important," he added. Ryukyu just stared at him. He was completely right. She knew that. She just couldn't believe it took getting defeated by a 15-year-old for her to learn those lessons. She took in a deep breath before stepping closer to Hitoshi and holding out her hand. That was a good fight, Shinso. Thank you for it, and thank you for helping teach me valuable lessons. Hitoshi smiled and shook her hand in return. Of course, you're welcome, I enjoyed myself, and please, feel free to call me Hitoshi, I prefer it to my family name anyway, he offered. Ryukyu nodded, smiling slightly and giving the boy another look over. This kid was interesting. If he became a hero, he could go very far. He might be suited more as an underground hero considering his fighting style, but she would feel honored to fight alongside him one day. Very well, thank you Hitoshi, in that case, feel free to call me Ryuko, she replied, giving him a small respectful bow which he then returned. With that, Aizawa turned back to the class. Now then, does anyone want to guess what the lesson I'm trying to teach you today is? He asked. The girl that guessed earlier raised her hand again. Not to underestimate our opponents no matter what, and to be prepared to fight dirty since our enemies will too. Aizawa nodded, pleased. Very good, exactly right, underestimating opponents has claimed the lives of countless heroes before, I don't want any of you to make that same mistake. The class nodded, understanding the reasoning behind the lesson now. Aizawa turned to the next pair. Right then Miruko, Ashido, you're up. Miruko was bouncing on the spot in excitement. That match was exhilarating to watch, and now she was even more excited to see what tricks her sparring partner had up her sleeves. The two went to their places at the ends of the arena, Mina grinning confidently and Miruko still hopping with anticipation. Same rules apply, both fighters ready? Aizawa asked. Both girls nodded. Begin. Having learned from the first fight, Miruko wasn't going to underestimate her opponent. She used her strong legs to launch herself towards the girl at the opposite end of the field, both of her legs held out in front of her in a drop kick. Even given Hitoshi's display of speed earlier, everybody was still surprised at the distance Mina managed to cover before the two opponents grew close. At first, Mina was just running normally, without the aid of her quirk. When there was about 2 meters of distance between them, Mina produced napalm from the soles of her feet, causing her to slide along the ground below Miruko. As Miruko went sailing over her head like a carrot-powered ballistic missile, Mina shot a fist above her head, her strike landing squarely in Miruko's gut. The rabbit hero grunted as the devilish girl's fist was planted into her stomach as she slid underneath her, the pain spoiling Miruko's plans for landing, resulting in her landing in a tangled, dusty heap. She didn't stay down for long though. She hopped back to her feet, grinning wildly. Not bad, devil girl, you're quicker than I expected, she congratulated. Mina was swaying from side to side, shifting her weight from one foot to another, ready to move as soon as she needed to. Thanks, you're not so bad yourself, bunny girl, she replied teasingly. Miruko chuckled. Yeah, she liked these kids, this girl in particular. That only meant she was going to push herself even farther though. She started sprinting towards her opponent, her strong legs allowing her to move much quicker than even some people with speed quirks. It was only Mina's natural instincts and agility that allowed her to dodge out of the way of Miruko's lightning-quick roundhouse kick. Still producing the more slippery napalm, she began skating in circles around the rabbit hero, watching for an opening. Miruko was just waiting for her opponent to leave an opening too, despite all of her instincts screaming at her to strike now. Miruko ran out of patience first, going for a back roundhouse, attempting to clothesline Mina as she slid around her. Mina only barely dodged, having to slide out of the way, further away from her opponent. Miruko took this opportunity to lunge for the girl, tackling her to the ground and wrapping herself around her, trapping her arms against her torso and wrapping her own legs around her opponent's. You're pinned, yield or I start squeezing, Miruko warned, applying a bit of pressure to prove her point. Mina winced in Miruko's, ironically, snake-like constriction but smirked. It was then that Miruko noticed her entire body was covered in that weird jelly-looking stuff. She groaned slightly at the feeling as some of it stuck to her, their proximity making much of it transfer to her. Tell me Miruko, what do you think my quirk is? Mina asked, groaning slightly from the pressure being applied to her. Miruko took a second to examine it a bit closer. It was a mostly clear jelly-looking substance with a slight yellow tint. It also had a strange smell. As she breathed it in, she suddenly realized what it was. It smelt like gasoline. Miruko's eyes widened and she attempted to push the red girl away from her, but she didn't do it quick enough. Mina suddenly bursting into flames, igniting both the napalm on herself but on Miruko too. Miruko quickly leapt away in a panic, ripping her jacket off and stamping on it, leaving her in just her trousers and a gray sports bra. After the fire was extinguished on her jacket, she looked back up to her opponent and froze. Mina was stood upright in front of her, her entire body ablaze with an intense fire, a fanged grin on her face and her dark eyes and horns making her look positively demonic. "Like my quirk?" Mina asked, her grin still wide and truly terrifying, the fire rippling around her. "I call it Infernal Blaze, pretty appropriate name, right?" Miruko could only nod, just staring at the girl absolutely engulfed in this raging fire and not reacting to it in the slightest. Mina then charged forward, throwing a blazing fist at Miruko's face. Understandably, even skilled combatants panicked when fire got so close to them, thousands of years of human evolution and instinct warning them of the dangers of fire. Miruko panicked and backed up, holding her arms out in front of her protectively. Mina skated forward, the napalm igniting as she moved, leaving a burning trail behind her. Soon, Miruko was surrounded by a wide ring of intense fire that Mina was just standing in the middle of in a fighting stance, completely unfazed by the heat. "Yield, Miruko, you won't be able to cope with this heat for long," Mina warned, her voice serious and commanding. Miruko growled at being trapped like this but grinned. She wasn't one of the top students in the school for nothing. She dropped down low and then jumped as high as she could, her legs sending her flying over the ring of fire and outside of its range. Mina skated forward, following Miruko's path through the air so she could be nearby when she landed. Miruko grinned, just as she hoped for. As she approached the ground, Miruko raised one leg over her head as she fell, aiming for Mina. Just as she was about to hit the ground, she released a devastating axe kick down on Mina's head. At least it would have been devastating if it had hit her. Mina barely twisted out of the way, her natural agility, dancing skills and acrobatic skills just barely allowing her to spin herself to the side, avoiding the kick which left a devastating crater in the ground. As Miruko recovered from the landing and the impact, she felt Mina wrap herself around her, much like she had done earlier in the match, her opponent still ablaze. "Yield now," Mina commanded. Feeling the intense flames liking at her flesh, Miruko growled. "I yield," she cried out in pain. Instantly, the flames died out and she just felt Mina clinging to her, thankfully no longer ablaze. "Miruko yields, Ashido wins," Aizawa announced, once again, the class behind him looking completely. Mina untangled herself from her opponent, trying to ignore how nice the contact felt and how incredibly hot the rabbit student was, her naturally red skin thankfully hiding her blush, and holding out a hand to help her opponent to her feet. Hesitantly, Miruko took it after a few seconds' hesitation, allowing the red girl to help her to her feet. She made sure she had her balance back before she threw one of her arms around Mina's shoulders and pulled her into a tight one-armed hug, leaving Mina's face pressed into the side of her sports bra. "That was awesome," Miruko cried, tightening her hold on the devilish girl. "I thought I had you there and then, whoosh, Yuten burst into flames. That was epic," Miruko added, cackling excitedly. Mina just blushed furiously at the contact with Miruko's dark skin and the position of her head. "We're definitely keeping in touch after this, Mina. Can I call you Mina?" "That's a nice name, by the way. You can call me Rumi if you want," Miruko offered happily. Shaking her energetically one last time, Miruko released the red girl, Mina somewhere between being thankful for being released and being upset the contact was over. Aizawa quietly groaned into his hand, his head dropping into his palms. "I'm gonna have to have the talk with her, aren't I?" he muttered to himself. He shook his head, pushing that thought out for now. "Great job the both of you. Come back over while Cementos here fixes the arena a bit," he calls out, waving the two over to him as the blocky concrete teacher walked out to the field. Miruko and Mina approached the class, Miruko cringing a bit as she felt the breeze on her burns. "You can head to the nurse's office after this, Miruko. Just hang around a minute," Aizawa said. Miruko shook her head. "Not a chance I'm missing the last match. Besides, I want to hear where I went wrong," she replied, smirking to hide the pain. Aizawa nodded, looking back to the class. "Who can tell me what you should have learned from that match?" A different student put their hand up, To always treat our opponents as dangerous, even if we think they're beaten, he suggested. Aizawa nodded. Exactly, not only that, this match should teach you to know your limits. Miruko knew she couldn't withstand Ishido's fire, so she yielded. While that will most likely not be an option in an actual fight, it should teach you that there are other options. Fleeing, for example, is always an option and is not a cowardly one if it saves your life. The class nodded again. Apparently there were different lessons for each of the fights. They all looked towards the black and green-haired boy standing next to their winged classmate who was currently writing in a notebook. They all grew nervous. Hawks was the most promising student in the whole school. What the hell could this kid do? As Cementos finished repairing the damage left by Miruko's kicks and Mina's fire, Aizawa turned to the third and final pair. All right then, Hawks. Midoriya, get up there, he instructed. They both nodded, Hawks, a little nervously. Aside from himself, those other two were probably the strongest students in the year if not the school, and they were both beaten. He glanced at the kid walking towards his place on the arena. The match hadn't even begun yet and he was already terrified. The two reached their places and got ready. For the final match, rules remain the same. Are both fighters ready? Aizawa asked. Both boys nodded. Begin. Hawks immediately tried to take to the sky, not wanting to stay still for even a second, having no idea what this kid's quirk was. As he pushed off from the ground, he didn't go anywhere. In panic, he looked down at his feet, seeing what looked like manacles made from pure darkness attached to the ground. He looked back up at his opponent, seeing a solid mass of darkness flying towards his chest at astounding speed. He felt the manacles on his feet disappear just as the mass connected with his chest, the mass now resembling the great claw of some horrific beast, gripping his chest in its palm. The impact and momentum of the claw sent Hawks flying backwards, his back landing on the ground several meters behind where he started. Hawks is out of bounds, Midoriya wins, Aizawa announced. Several of the class were on the ground, their legs having given out at the shock of what just happened. Hawks was the best student in the school and this kid took him out in under 5 seconds. Even Ryukio and Miruko had their mouths wide open in shock, not believing what they had just seen. The shadowy claw dissipated, allowing Hawks to stand up, himself still not quite sure what happened. He looked over at his opponent who surprisingly looked disappointed. Ah, that's a shame, I wanted a good fight like the other two, he hummed. He then snapped his fingers and looked towards Aizawa. Hey Aizawa, can we have a rematch? I won't finish that one quite so quickly. Aizawa thought for a second before nodding. Sure thing, just explain what let you win so easily first. Izuku nodded, jogging towards the class. Alright, well, long story short, I've been watching you all for weeks, learning every single thing about your quirks, fighting styles and personalities that I could, he explained. In theory, I could have gone up against any one of you and known what your quirk was, how you used it and what its limits were while you knew absolutely nothing about mine, giving me a huge advantage. Aizawa nodded. The lesson here is that if you become famous heroes, villains will know who you are and what your quirks are while you will most likely know nothing about them. That gives them an advantage as they can take you by surprise, he added. This goes back to the lesson from Ryukyu and Shinso's match. Never underestimate your opponents, especially when they may have more intel than you. The class didn't nod this time, still staring at the teenager who beat their strongest classmate. Like he was nothing. Aizawa turned back to Izuku. All right, Midoriya, go on and have your rematch. Izuku grinned and ran back to his position, Hawks already having retaken his in preparation. All right then, begin. This time, no shadowy restraints stopped Hawks from taking to the sky. Last match his opponent showed he had long-range capabilities, now he wanted to see if he had close-range ones too. Tucking into a dive, Hawks shot towards Izuku like a feathery bullet. Izuku pulled up a wall of shadow in front of him, making Hawks back off before he impacted with it. Hawks hovered in the air for a second, thinking of his next move, then the shadow wall transformed into a hovering swarm of icicle-like shards of darkness. Oh crap! Hawks muttered in alarm as the projectiles flew towards him. Flapping his wings forward, Hawks fired off as many of his feathers as he could to intercept the shadowy spikes. The shadows simply cut through his feathers, sending them fluttering to the ground, his control over them severed. His eyes widened. How tough were those shadows? His feathers were strong enough to carry a grown man, and they just cut right through them. Panicking slightly, Hawks shot upwards into the sky. While still lightning quick, due to missing around a third of his feathers, he had lost a good portion of his speed. However, he was still fast enough to outrun the spikes. Hoping that Izuku could only concentrate on one thing at once, Hawks shot towards him again, flying past the spikes and heading straight for his opponent, pulling a feather from a wing and wielding it like a sword. Hawks grinned. He'd used his feather blades to cut through steel girders before. He should have no problems breaking through any defenses the kid could put up. Izuku watched the winged student flying towards him, feather blade in hand. With one hand, he controlled the rain of spikes following close behind him. He extended the other and called on any nearby shadows, willing for a weapon to appear. What happened was that instead of the shadows coalescing into a solid form for him to use as it normally did, it seemed like Izuku opened a small shadow portal in the palm of his hand and that something came through. As the weight settled in his hand, Izuku glanced down at what was in his hand. It looked like some kind of cane, made entirely out of metal. The mane of the cane seemed to be made from some black metal, although the handle appeared to be polished silver. The handle also resembled the head of an eagle, and as it settled into his hand, the pointed tip of the cane pointing away from him, he realized it felt like a sword in his hands, similarly weighted. The only difference was the handle being at an angle rather than a regular sword's hilt. Remembering what was happening, he looked back up at the approaching feathery agent of destruction and swung his cane to meet his feather blade. There was a loud clang as the impact of the blade meeting the cane sent Hawks flying back a few feet, the feather breaking apart in his hands. Hawks just looked down at his hands in shock for a second before shadows appeared in his vision and he remembered what was still behind him. Quickly spinning around, he sent out as many feathers as he could while still remaining in the air, forming a barrier around him. Improvised special move, feather shield, he muttered, curling up inside the shield, waiting for the impact. The spikes embedded themselves into the feathers with a series of slicing noises, however none of them fully penetrated the feathers, apparently having been slowed enough by the shield. Hawks grunted and sent the feathers with the shadow spikes embedded in them as far away as possible. He noticed them turn to black mist after a second or two and flow towards his opponent. "All right then," came the artificially deepened voice of Izuku. Hawks turned around to face his opponent again. His opponent was now clad from the neck down in what looked like thin plate mail armor made from shadow, his cane thing in his right hand and a devilish grin on his face. "Let's see how you do on the ground," Izuku said, waving his left hand in the air. Hawks felt his wings get wrapped together, presumably with some sort of shadow bindings, making him drop the 4 or so feet he was hovering above the ground. Almost by instinct, Izuku flicked his right hand out as he took a step forward, flicking the cane through the air, the haft of the cane segmenting and becoming a row of sharp blades on some kind of cable. He flicked his new bladed whip into the air, still grinning widely. "Let's do this, Hawks," he growled menacingly. Hawks barely had time to reach behind him and draw 2 more feather blades before his opponent's new weapon came SNG through the air towards him, there being a loud snapping noise as it reached its maximum length, which seemed to be about 2 meters now. Hawks was immediately forced onto the defensive, only being able to use his blades for defense, having to replace them constantly as they were sliced in half by the razor-sharp bladed whip wielded by his opponent. This whole time, the grin never left Izuku's face, having too much fun really letting his powers loose like this. As both of his latest blades were neatly severed by the whip, Hawks reached back to draw more, only to find he had no more feathers available. He had used them all. With this realization, panic set in and he looked back up at the agent of darkness before him, still grinning unsettlingly. Quickly slamming the tip of his cane back onto the ground, making it reform into its original form and flicking it into his left hand, Izuku called all the shadows making up his armor into his right hand, making a huge, whirling, shadowy fist. Hawks could only stare at this and brace for death. The oversized shadowy fist hit him like a freight train made of hate. A hate train. With that final blow, he was both sent flying clear of the arena and from the realm of consciousness entirely. Hawks got fed up. Midoriya wins, Aizawa announced, barely holding back laughter. Once again, The class could only stare at the winner of the match with true fear. Even Maruko and Ryukyu were wobbling at the knees a bit. Mina and Hitoshi had seen Izuku's overwhelming displays of power before, but that didn't make it any less impressive. Slowly, Izuku turned to the rest of the class, the shadows forming a whirling veil around him and that terrifying grin still on his face. "Anyone else want to go?" he asked, voice sounding like their individual nightmares. Meanwhile, Nizu was in his office, crying with laughter at the sight of an entire hero class fleeing in terror from a 15-year-old standing over one of their defeated classmates. After he calmed down, he came up with an idea, something that could both benefit Izuku, Mina and Hitoshi, but UA too. Nizu grinned. Anyone who knew that grin knew that it could only mean something horrible was about to happen. Nizu cackled. "Oh yes, that'll do nicely," he laughed manically, spilling his cup of tea all over himself as he laughed like a supervillain. It was the day after Izuku had chased an entire third-year class from a training field, screaming for their lives as they did so, that Izuku, Mina and Hitoshi found themselves in Nizu's office for that day's lesson. As it happened, today was all about tests and exams. None of them were excited about this, especially when they saw the worryingly tall stack of papers on Nizu's desk, but they grit their teeth and got through it. Many hours later, the trio were mentally exhausted, having been tested almost non-stop for the past 8 hours, but they had finished all of the tests. Nizu had been grading them as they worked, grading one exam while they worked on the next, and so they only had to wait a short while for the last one to be marked. With that done, he hopped off his seat and went over to the trio, all slumped in their seats, still too mentally exhausted to do anything. "I know today has been a long one, but can I have your attention for a few minutes please?" he asked. The three teens all slowly sat more upright, turning their attention to their rodent teacher. Nizu beamed widely, looking over the three in turn. "Well done you three, you've just completed the final exams that you would have taken in high school," he announced. They all looked at each other in confusion. Those were high school exams?" Mina asked, scratching the base of her horns in confusion. Nizu nodded. "Oh yes, and you all did remarkably, especially since you are still only 15 and I've compressed all 3 years of high school into the past year and a half." They looked at each other again, still confused. "But sir, weren't you teaching us middle school work?" Hitoshi asked. "I was for the first year. You technically graduated middle school about a year and a half ago. Since then we've been doing high school work," Nizu explained. "Why? Did you think I was giving you more difficult work just to be cruel?" All three teens nodded. "Yes," Izuku responded, deadpan. Nizu chuckled. "I don't blame you, but no, you have all now graduated from high school now, so you will not have to go to one. Does that mean we can start UA early?" Mina asked excitedly. "Unfortunately not. Legally we can only accept you as students when you are all 18, however," Nizu said with a smirk. "I would instead like you to work at UA for those 3 years. The trio blinked, not quite comprehending what he just said. "Hang on a second, you want us to work at UA?" Hitoshi clarified. "In what way?" "As teachers." Nizu shook his head. "Not quite, as teaching assistants. I watched you 3 yesterday with Aizawa's third-year class. Not only are you skilled and powerful enough to defeat the 3 strongest students in the school, you did so in a way that allowed even them to learn from the experiences," he explained. "From the start of next year, I want to attach you 3 to a first-year hero class. You will help train them all the way up to their 4th year, at which point you will become students yourself." The trio looked at each other, all intrigued at the prospect. "Could we have some time to think about it, Nizu?" Izuku asked. "Of course you can. You no longer have to come to these lessons now that you've done the exams, so take all the time you need and congratulations once again. You graduated both middle and high school in 3 years. That is an incredible achievement," Nizu responded, beaming proudly. The trio turned to leave after giving Nizu a small bow. "Thank you, Nizu," they said in unison. As they walked down the hallway, they remained in silence for a few minutes, all thinking over what he said. "I think we should do it," Izuku said, breaking the silence. Mina nodded, although Hitoshi still looked unsure. "I think it might be interesting, but I'm not sure yet," he responded, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's fair enough. Like Nizu said, we can take time to think about it so you can mull it over, see if you'd be up for it," Mina replied, giving him a kind smile. Alright then, I think I'm gonna go take a nap, I'm exhausted, Hitoshi responded, walking off in the direction of their house. That left Izuku and Mina together, just wandering around the campus with no goal in mind. Ooh, hey Izuku, why don't we head into town? I heard a new hero merch shop opened, why don't we go look for it? Mina suggested. Izuku grinned excitedly. Good idea Mina, let's go. On their way out of UA, the duo passed a group of students from the third-year class they trained with yesterday. Upon seeing them, they proceeded to turn around and run the opposite direction, other students watching with confusion. Why exactly were hero students running away from some teenagers? The pair soon found themselves in downtown Mizudafu, searching for the rumored merch store and enjoying the good weather. The two were laughing and joking with